Hi everyone, welcome to Ricktopus. I hope you're all doing well. Today I want to argue that Morty Smith has complex post-traumatic stress disorder from repeated severe trauma during his critical adolescent years. He's trapped in a trauma bond with Rick where abuse mixed with occasional kindness makes escape feel impossible, and he's being systematically corrupted into becoming the next Rick Sanchez. This isn't just a damaged kid. This is a textbook case of how ongoing trauma during development doesn't just hurt you, it fundamentally reshapes who you become, often transforming victims into copies of their abusers. We're going to trace Morty's psychological destruction from Season 1 to Season 8, using only what the show actually tells us, from the sexual assault in Episode 5 to the explicit PTSD diagnosis in Season 8. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. When we first meet Morty Smith, he's a pretty typical 14-year-old kid dealing with typical teenage problems. He goes to Harry Herpson High School, where he struggles with his classes and desperately wants the popular girl, Jessica, to notice him. He lives with his parents, Beth and Jerry, and his older sister, Summer, in a regular suburban house. On the surface, Morty seems like just another awkward teenager trying to survive high school. But even before his grandfather Rick crashes back into his life, Morty is dealing with some real challenges that make him more fragile than most kids his age. The show's creators have been pretty open about who Morty is supposed to be. According to Dan Harmon, one of the people who created Rick and Morty, Morty likely has what used to be called Asperger's syndrome, which is now considered part of the autism spectrum. Harmon himself has talked about having this condition, and he built it into both Rick and Morty's characters. This explains a lot about why Morty acts the way he does. He has trouble reading social situations. He stammers and stutters when he talks, especially when he's nervous, which is pretty much always. He struggles in school, not because he's stupid, but because he has a learning disability that the show mentions several times throughout the series. His math teacher gives him simple addition problems that most kids his age would have learned years earlier. But having a learning disability doesn't make Morty dumb. In fact, throughout the show, we see that when Morty actually cares about something, or understands it in his own way, he can be surprisingly clever. The problem is that traditional school doesn't work for the way his brain processes information. This kind of challenge would be hard enough for any kid to deal with, but it also means Morty's self-esteem is already pretty low before Rick even shows up. When you struggle with things that seem easy for everyone else, when you can't talk to girls without freezing up, when you feel like you're behind all your classmates, you start to believe you're not worth much. That's where Morty is at the beginning of the series. Morty is also described in the show as good-natured, which is actually one of his defining traits. Even when things go wrong, even when people treat him badly, Morty generally tries to do what he thinks is right. He wants to help people. He feels bad when others get hurt. He has a strong sense of right and wrong, even if he doesn't always know how to act on it. This moral compass becomes really important later because it's one of the main things that separates Morty from his grandfather Rick. Where Rick sees the universe as meaningless and doesn't care about consequences, Morty actually cares deeply about not hurting people. He wants to be a good person, even when he doesn't know how. The show tells us that Morty is easily distressed and easily stressed. This isn't just teenage anxiety. Morty has real, significant anxiety that affects his daily life. He worries constantly. He second-guesses himself. He's nervous around other people, especially his classmates. The way Morty acts around Jessica, his crush, shows this perfectly. He can barely string two words together when she's nearby. He's so afraid of saying the wrong thing that he often can't say anything at all. This isn't just shyness. It's the kind of anxiety that makes normal social interactions feel impossible. What's interesting is that the show makes it clear Morty knows he's anxious and knows he's different from other kids. He's aware that he struggles. He's aware that other students see him as the weird kid, the one who's always getting pulled out of school by his crazy grandfather. This self-awareness actually makes things harder because Morty knows what he wants to be, confident, popular, normal, but he can't figure out how to get there. He wants a regular teenage life. He wants to go to school dances. He wants Jessica to like him. He wants to hang out with friends and not worry about interdimensional adventures or his family falling apart. But even before Rick's adventures complicate everything, Morty can't seem to achieve that normal life he craves. Morty's relationship with his family before the show starts is worth understanding too. His mom Beth is a horse surgeon who clearly has her own issues, mainly stemming from her father Rick abandoning her as a child. His dad Jerry is kind of a loser, and even Morty seems aware of this. Jerry doesn't have a job at the start of the series, and he and Beth are clearly in a shaky marriage. Summer, Morty's sister, pretty much ignores him most of the time, like most older siblings do. The family dynamic is already strained, already dysfunctional in quiet ways. There's tension between his parents, there's the weight of Rick's absence hanging over Beth. Morty is growing up in a house where the adults are dealing with their own problems and don't have much emotional energy left over for their kids. When we see Morty in the pilot episode, before he's been on too many adventures with Rick, he's nervous and uncertain, but he's also still somewhat innocent. He hasn't seen the truly horrible things he'll see later. He hasn't experienced real trauma yet. He still believes in the basic goodness of people and the universe. He still thinks there are rules that matter and consequences that stick. He still has hope that things will work out okay. This baseline version of Morty is important to understand because it shows us who he was before everything changed. The show describes Morty as easily manipulated, and we see this from the very beginning. Rick quickly figures out that Morty desperately wants approval, especially from authority figures, and especially from Rick himself. Morty wants his grandfather to think he's useful and smart. He wants to prove he's not just dead weight on these adventures. This need for validation makes Morty vulnerable to manipulation. When someone acts like they believe in him or tells him he did a good job, Morty will do almost anything to keep earning that approval. Rick picks up on this immediately and uses it constantly. Morty also wants to be seen as brave and capable, even though he's terrified most of the time. He volunteers for dangerous tasks even when he's shaking with fear, because he doesn't want Rick or anyone else to think he's a coward. This combination of low self-esteem and desire to prove himself creates a dangerous situation. Morty will push himself into situations that are way beyond what he can handle, just to avoid looking weak. He'll agree to things he should say no to because he's desperate to be seen as more than just the scared kid who stammers. There's something else important about baseline Morty that the show makes clear. He's good-natured to the point of being naive. He wants to believe the best about people. He wants to trust that others have good intentions. In the early episodes, when Rick tells him something is safe or okay, Morty tends to believe him, even when he probably shouldn't. This trusting nature isn't stupidity. It's actually a kind of optimism. A belief that the universe isn't completely terrible. But this same quality that makes Morty kind and caring also makes him an easy target for people who want to take advantage of him. Morty's learning disability and struggles in school aren't just background details. They're actually really important for understanding his psychology. When you're a kid who feels behind everyone else academically, you start to internalize the message that you're not smart. Even though Morty is actually quite clever in many ways, he's been told by school and grades and standardized tests that he's not measuring up. This creates a kind of learned helplessness, where Morty starts to believe he can't figure things out on his own, that he needs smarter people like Rick to solve problems for him. This belief makes him even more dependent on Rick's intelligence and even more vulnerable to Rick's control. The stammering and stuttering that Morty does constantly is also worth paying attention to. Speech difficulties often get worse when someone is anxious or stressed, and Morty is almost always anxious and stressed. The way he talks, with lots of and starting sentences over, shows us his internal state. His brain is going too fast, or he's too worried about saying the wrong thing, or he's too overwhelmed to get words out smoothly. This speech pattern actually gets worse as the series goes on and Morty experiences more trauma. But even at the baseline, it's a clear sign of his anxiety. What's striking about Morty at the beginning is how much he still cares about normal things. He cares about school, even though he struggles there. He cares about what his classmates think of him. He cares about his family, even though they're dysfunctional. He wants a girlfriend. He wants friends. He wants to fit in. These normal teenage desires show us that despite his challenges, Morty is still connected to the regular world. He still values the same things other 14-year-olds value. He hasn't become cynical or detached yet. He still thinks normal life is worth pursuing. The show also establishes early on that Morty has a strong emotional sensitivity. He feels things deeply. When something bad happens, it really affects him. When someone gets hurt, he genuinely feels upset about it. When he makes a mistake, he feels guilty. This emotional sensitivity is part of what makes Morty good-natured and moral, but it also means that traumatic experiences hit him harder than they might hit someone more emotionally guarded. He doesn't have the kind of thick skin that would protect him from the psychological damage of Rick's adventures. Understanding who Morty is at baseline also means understanding what he's not. He's not violent. At the beginning of the series, Morty is actually pretty squeamish about violence and death. He doesn't want to hurt people or see people get hurt. He's not manipulative or sneaky. He's actually pretty straightforward and honest, sometimes painfully so. He's not cynical or nihilistic. He believes things matter and actions have meaning. He's not confident or self-assured, but he's also not completely broken. He's struggling, sure, but he's still functioning. He still goes to school most days. He still has hope for the future. He still believes things can get better. All of these traits, the anxiety, the learning disability, the low self-esteem, the desire for approval, the trusting nature, the strong moral sense, the emotional sensitivity, create a specific psychological profile. Morty is a vulnerable kid. Not weak, but vulnerable. He has real challenges that make life harder for him than for many other teenagers. But he's also resilient in his own way, still trying, still hoping, still caring about things. He's at a critical point in his development, 14 years old, when his brain is still forming and his personality is still taking shape. This is actually the worst possible time for someone to experience severe trauma, because the teenage brain is so vulnerable to being permanently affected by traumatic experiences. What we're seeing when we meet Morty is a kid who already has some strikes against him. The anxiety, the learning challenges, the low self-esteem, the family dysfunction, but who hasn't been truly damaged yet. He's had a tough time, sure, but he hasn't been broken. His worldview is still basically intact. He still believes in right and wrong, in cause and effect, in the possibility of good things happening. He's anxious, but not traumatized. He's struggling, but not destroyed. This baseline matters because it gives us a measuring stick. When we see how Morty changes throughout the series, we can compare it to who he was at the start. We can see what gets lost. We can track the deterioration. We can understand that the things that happen to Morty don't just add to his existing anxiety. They fundamentally reshape who he is as a person. A psychologist looking at Morty at this point would see a kid who needs support, and maybe some therapy for his anxiety and learning challenges, but who has the potential to grow into a healthy adult with the right help and environment. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Unfortunately for Morty, he's about to get the exact opposite of the right help and environment, because just when this vulnerable, anxious, approval-seeking 14-year-old needs stability and support, his grandfather Rick moves into the house and immediately starts dragging him on interdimensional adventures. And the very first major trauma Morty will experience won't just be scary or upsetting. It will be the kind of event that psychologists know can fundamentally damage a young person's sense of safety and trust in the world. Section 2. The Sexual Assault Trauma. Meeseeks and Destroy. In the 5th episode of the first season, something happens to Morty that will never be fully addressed again in the show, despite being one of the most serious things a person can experience. The episode is called Meeseeks and Destroy, and it starts with Morty telling Rick that he's tired of how traumatic and dangerous their adventures have been. Morty wants to lead an adventure for once. Something simple and fun that won't end with people dying or everything going horribly wrong. Rick agrees to let Morty pick where they go, making a bet that Morty's adventure will be just as bad as Rick's adventures usually are. Morty chooses a fantasy world, the kind you might see in fairy tale movies or video games. There are giants and castles and medieval villages. At first it seems like Morty made a good choice. This world looks magical and exciting without being too dangerous. But things start going wrong pretty quickly, as they always do. Rick and Morty end up in a giant's courthouse, get put on trial, and barely escape. They need to find a place to hide and wait for help, so they go to a tavern called the Thirsty Step that's built under one of the giant stairs. At the tavern, Rick starts playing card games with some of the aliens there, and he's winning a lot of money. Morty is feeling good about himself because his adventure is actually going okay. Sure, there have been some problems, but nothing too terrible has happened yet. Morty even gets into an argument with Rick about Rick's constant negative attitude, telling Rick that he's actually having a good time for once. Then Morty goes to the bathroom to wash his hands. In the bathroom, Morty meets King Jellybean. He's the ruler of the village they're in, though Morty doesn't know that yet. King Jellybean looks like a big jelly bean with a crown, arms, and legs. At first, he seems friendly. He starts talking to Morty in a nice way, asking about his day. But then King Jellybean starts touching Morty's shoulders, massaging them in a way that makes Morty uncomfortable. The touching gets more aggressive. King Jellybean forces Morty into a bathroom stall and locks the door. What happens next is shown clearly in the episode, and the show doesn't make jokes about it or treat it lightly. King Jellybean tries to rape Morty. He tells Morty to stop fighting and to just let this happen. He keeps licking Morty while Morty struggles and tries to get away. Morty is crying and terrified. He manages to fight King Jellybean off by repeatedly slamming the toilet seat down on him, beating him badly enough that Morty can escape. The whole scene is shot in a way that makes it clear this is a real sexual assault attempt, not something the show wants the audience to laugh at. When Morty comes out of the bathroom, he's shaking. The episode describes him as trembling terribly. He can barely stand. Rick is still at his card game, and he's in a good mood because he's been winning. He tells Morty that he's actually having fun and made a lot of money, but Morty can barely speak. His voice is shaking when he tells Rick that he wants to leave now, that the adventure is over, and they need to go home. Rick is confused because things seem to be going well, and he's in the middle of a card game. Morty's voice breaks when he practically begs Rick to just take them home. He says he doesn't care about losing their bet anymore. He just wants to go home right now. Rick notices how upset Morty is, and then he sees King Jellybean coming out of the bathroom behind Morty. King Jellybean looks terrible. His face is bruised and swollen from where Morty beat him with the toilet seat. Rick is smart enough to put the pieces together. He understands what happened in that bathroom, even though Morty doesn't say it out loud. Rick's expression changes completely. For a moment, you can see that he's genuinely angry. Not his usual sarcastic annoyed, but actually furious about what was done to Morty. But Rick doesn't talk about it. He doesn't ask Morty if he's okay or if he wants to talk about what happened. Instead, Rick tells Morty that they should go down to the village and share the money he won with the townspeople, to end the adventure on a positive note. Morty cheers up a little at this idea, grateful that Rick is being nice for once. They go to the village, and the people there are very happy about the money. Everything seems like it might end okay after all. Then the villagers mention that they want Rick and Morty to meet their king before they leave. King Jellybean shows up, still bruised and beaten looking, and tries to approach Morty again. Morty immediately says no, they have to leave right now. Rick opens a portal back home, and they jump through it quickly. Once they're safely away, Rick opens the portal again just enough to stick his arm through with a laser gun. He shoots King Jellybean in front of all the villagers, killing him instantly. The villagers are shocked and horrified, but Rick and Morty are already gone. This is important. Rick kills King Jellybean specifically because of what he did to Morty. Rick doesn't kill people to be nice or to help others usually. He kills King Jellybean as revenge for the assault. It's one of the few times in the show where Rick does something purely to protect or avenge Morty, with no other reason. Rick couldn't let King Jellybean get away with what he tried to do. After the episode ends, there's a scene that plays after the credits. Two villagers are going through King Jellybean's belongings after his death. They find a locked box and open it. Inside are photographs that are described as incriminating and so disturbing that one villager almost throws up when he sees them. The other villager says they should burn the photos to protect King Jellybean's reputation and keep the village's morale up. They burn the evidence. Then the camera pulls back to show a statue in the village square, a statue of King Jellybean with his hands on a young child's shoulders, in the same position he had Morty in before the assault. The show's creators later confirmed in interviews and on social media that King Jellybean was a serial child rapist. Those photos in the box were child pornography, probably of his previous victims. The statue shows that he had been doing this to children for a long time, and the village either didn't know or chose to ignore it. Morty wasn't King Jellybean's first victim, and if Rick hadn't killed him, Morty probably wouldn't have been the last. This matters for several reasons when we're talking about Morty's psychology. First, sexual assault, especially for someone Morty's age, is one of the most damaging, traumatic experiences a person can go through. It affects how you see the world, how you trust people, how you feel about your own body and safety. For a 14-year-old who already has anxiety and low self-esteem, this kind of trauma can be completely devastating. Second, look at how Morty reacts immediately after. He's shaking, he can barely talk, he just wants to go home and feel safe. These are normal trauma responses. Morty's brain and body are trying to deal with something terrible that just happened. He needs comfort and support and probably professional help to process what he experienced, but he doesn't get any of that. Third, and this is crucial, the show never brings this up again. Morty never talks to anyone about what happened. He doesn't tell his parents, he doesn't go to therapy. Rick never asks him if he's okay or wants to talk about it. The assault just gets buried, pushed down, never dealt with. Morty has to carry this trauma around with him for the rest of the series, and nobody ever helps him process it. In the real world, when someone experiences sexual assault and doesn't get help dealing with it, the trauma doesn't just go away. It stays in their mind and body, affecting how they think and feel and act. Untreated trauma like this can lead to all kinds of problems. Worse anxiety, depression, trouble trusting people, nightmares, sudden fear reactions to things that remind them of the assault. For someone Morty's age, whose brain is still developing, unprocessed trauma can actually change how their brain grows and forms connections. The episode treats the assault seriously while it's happening. The scene is shot to be disturbing and scary, not funny. Morty's terror is real. Rick's anger is real. The show makes it clear that this is a horrible thing that happened to Morty. But then the show moves on and never mentions it again, like it never happened. This matches how trauma often works in real life, especially for young people who don't have adults helping them deal with it. The trauma happened, it was terrible, and now Morty just has to keep living with it buried inside him. There's also something important about the fact that Morty fought back. He didn't just freeze up or give up. Despite being terrified, despite being overpowered at first, Morty found a way to fight King Jellybean off. He hurt his attacker badly enough to escape. This shows courage and survival instinct. But here's the thing. Even when someone successfully fights off an attacker, even when they escape, they still experience the trauma of the assault. Fighting back doesn't erase what happened or make it less damaging psychologically. Morty still went through something terrible even though he got away. Another layer to this is what it means that Morty begged Rick to take him home. Morty gave up on his adventure, admitted Rick was right that his ideas lead to bad things happening, just to get away from that place. For a kid who desperately wants his grandfather's approval and wants to prove he's useful and smart, giving up like that shows how badly Morty was affected. He was willing to lose the bet, willing to admit defeat, willing to look weak in front of Rick just to feel safe again. That tells us how scared and hurt Morty was. Rick's response is interesting too. He doesn't make Morty talk about it. He doesn't ask questions. He just figures out what happened and handles it in his own way, by killing King Jellybean. On one hand, Rick is showing he cares about Morty by avenging him. On the other hand, Rick doesn't give Morty any emotional support or help him process the trauma. Rick solves the problem the way Rick solves everything, with violence and by moving on quickly. But Morty needed more than revenge. He needed someone to tell him it wasn't his fault, that he's going to be okay, that what happened was wrong and terrible. He needed actual care and support. He didn't get it. The episode also shows us that Morty was targeted specifically because he seemed vulnerable. King Jellybean picked Morty because Morty looked like an easy victim, a young kid, alone, in an unfamiliar place. Predators look for people who seem like they won't fight back or won't be believed if they tell someone. Morty's anxiety and stammering and obvious discomfort probably made him seem like a safe target to King Jellybean. This is something that happens to real victims of assault. They're often chosen because they seem vulnerable or isolated. When Morty comes out of the bathroom and can barely speak, when he's shaking and just wants to go home, he's experiencing shock. His brain is being flooded with stress chemicals. His body is in fight or flight mode. Everything feels dangerous and scary. This immediate response to trauma is the beginning of how traumatic memories get formed differently than regular memories. Traumatic memories often get stuck in a way that makes them come back suddenly and feel like they're happening again, instead of feeling like something that's safely in the past. The fact that this happens in episode 5 is significant too. This is early in the series, early in Morty's adventures with Rick. Morty has already been through some scary stuff by this point, but nothing like this. This is his introduction to the fact that the universe contains people who want to hurt him in terrible ways. People who will take advantage of him if they can. People who seem friendly, but have horrible intentions. This shatters a kind of innocence that Morty still had. After this, Morty knows that danger doesn't just mean monsters or explosions. It means people who will try to hurt him in deeply personal, violating ways. This trauma also happens right after Morty was feeling good about himself. He thought his adventure was going well. He was standing up to Rick, feeling confident for once. Then this happens, and all that confidence gets destroyed instantly. This teaches Morty's brain a terrible lesson. Even when things seem okay, even when you think you're doing well, something awful can happen suddenly. This makes it harder for Morty to relax or feel safe going forward because his brain now knows that safety can be an illusion. The episode is called Meeseeks and Destroy, and most people remember it for the Mr. Meeseeks characters who helped Jerry with his golf game in the other storyline. The Mr. Meeseeks are funny and became really popular with fans. But the episode's other story, the one about Morty's assault, is way more important for understanding Morty's character and psychology. It's just that it's so dark and uncomfortable that people don't talk about it as much. The show even seems to try to forget about it after this episode, never bringing it up again. If we're trying to understand Morty from a psychological perspective, we can't skip over this. We can't pretend it didn't happen just because the show moves on from it. This is a major traumatic event in Morty's life. It's the kind of thing that would send most kids into serious therapy. It's the kind of thing that changes how a person sees themselves and the world. And Morty never gets any help dealing with it. He just has to keep going on adventures with Rick, having more scary things happen, with this unprocessed trauma sitting inside him the whole time. What makes this even more damaging is that it happens in the context of Morty trying to prove himself to Rick. Morty wanted to show he could lead a good adventure. Instead, he experienced something horrible and had to give up and ask Rick to save him. In Morty's mind, this might feel like failure on top of trauma. Not only did something terrible happen to him, but it happened while he was trying to prove he was capable and strong. This can create a twisted kind of shame, where Morty feels bad about himself for being victimized, even though none of it was his fault. The scene after the credits, with the villagers burning the evidence, shows something else important: how communities sometimes protect abusers and hide the truth to avoid dealing with uncomfortable realities. The villagers would rather burn the proof of King Jellybean's crimes than face the truth about who their king really was. This happens in real life too, where people don't want to believe that someone they respected or looked up to could do terrible things. But when evidence gets destroyed and truth gets hidden, it means other victims never get justice, and new victims might not be protected. For Morty, watching the village celebrate King Jellybean as a hero, even though he was a monster, must have felt awful. If Morty had tried to tell the villagers what happened, they probably wouldn't have believed him. They would have protected their king instead of protecting Morty. This is another thing that happens to real victims: not being believed, or having people protect the person who hurt them. Even though Morty didn't try to tell the villagers, the fact that Rick had to kill King Jellybean to stop him shows that there was no other justice available. This episode plants something dark in Morty's psychology that will grow and affect him throughout the series. It's his first experience with real violation, real helplessness, real terror of another person. And because it never gets addressed or healed, it becomes part of the foundation of trauma that everything else will build on top of. Each new bad thing that happens to Morty won't be happening to a healthy kid who can bounce back. It will be happening to a kid who already has this buried trauma, making him more fragile and more vulnerable to being damaged by future experiences. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But as terrible as this assault was, Morty was about to experience something that would hurt him in a completely different way, a kind of trauma that would make him question the very nature of his reality and his place in it. Because just one episode later, Morty would make a mistake that would destroy an entire world and force him to literally bury his own dead body in his backyard. Section 3. The Dimension Abandonment. Rick Potion number 9. The very next episode after Morty's assault is called Rick Potion number 9. And it's where Morty experiences something so strange and horrible that it changes everything about how he sees himself and his life. This episode starts with something that seems simple. Morty has a crush on a girl at his school named Jessica, and there's a school dance coming up. Morty is desperate for Jessica to notice him and like him back, but he's too nervous and awkward to just talk to her normally. So he does what any kid with a genius scientist grandfather might do. He asks Rick to make him a love potion. Rick actually agrees to do it, which should have been Morty's first warning sign that this was a bad idea. Rick makes a potion using chemicals from something called a vole, which is a small animal. The potion is supposed to make Jessica fall in love with Morty. Rick warns Morty that there might be side effects if Jessica is sick, but Morty doesn't really listen to that part. He's too excited about finally getting Jessica to like him. At the school dance, Morty gives Jessica the potion by putting it in her drink. She immediately falls in love with him and starts acting really affectionate. But there's a problem. Jessica has the flu. The potion mixes with the flu virus in her body and becomes airborne, which means it spreads through the air like a cold or flu would spread. Within minutes, everyone at the dance who breathes the same air as Jessica falls in love with Morty. Then those people spread it to more people, and those people spread it to even more people. The love potion becomes like a virus that spreads across the entire planet in a matter of hours. By the end of the night, every person on Earth is obsessively in love with Morty, except for people who are related to him by blood. His parents, his sister, and Rick. This is already terrifying for Morty. Imagine everyone in the whole world chasing you, trying to grab you, screaming that they love you. But Rick tells Morty he can fix it. He makes what he calls an antidote, which is supposed to cure everyone and make them normal again. He uses DNA from praying mantises to make this antidote and spreads it around the world. For about 2 seconds, it seems to work. Everyone stops being in love with Morty and goes back to normal. Then they all turn into praying mantis monsters. And now instead of loving Morty, they want to mate with him and then eat him because that's what praying mantises do. Rick realizes he messed up the antidote, so he tries again with a different antidote, using DNA from other animals to try to cancel out the mantis DNA. He spreads this new antidote around the world. Again, for a few seconds, it seems like it might work, but then everyone mutates into something even worse. The show calls them Cronenbergs, named after a movie director who makes films with disturbing body horror. These Cronenberg creatures are horrifying. They're lumpy, distorted, inside-out looking monsters made of flesh and teeth and random body parts all mashed together. They can barely talk. They can barely think. They're not really human anymore. And this is permanent. Rick tells Morty that he can't fix this. Everyone on Earth, billions of people, has been turned into monsters, and there's no way to turn them back. Morty completely freaks out. This is his fault. He asked for the love potion. He's the reason everyone in the world got turned into monsters. His original family, his real mom Beth, his real dad Jerry, his real sister Summer, are still human, but they're stuck on a planet that's now filled with monsters. Jessica, the girl Morty liked, is a monster now. Everyone at his school is a monster. His teachers, his neighbors, everyone he's ever known is gone, turned into these horrible creatures. But Rick has a solution, and this is where things get really messed up. Rick tells Morty that in the infinite multiverse, there are infinite versions of their reality. That means there are other dimensions where other versions of Rick and Morty exist. Rick uses his technology to scan through these dimensions until he finds one very specific reality. In this reality, that dimension's version of Rick successfully created a cure for the Cronenberg problem. That Rick fixed everything and turned everyone back to normal. But then, just a few minutes after saving the world, that Rick was working on a different invention in his garage, and it exploded and killed both him and that dimension's Morty instantly. Rick's plan is simple and horrible. They're going to go to that dimension and take the place of the Rick and Morty who just died. Nobody will know the difference because they died instantly. Rick and Morty can just slide into their lives and pretend to be them. They'll get to live in a dimension where the Cronenberg problem was solved, where everything is normal and all they have to do is replace their dead alternate selves. Rick opens a portal to this dimension, and he and Morty step through. They arrive in the garage just after the explosion. There are two bodies on the floor. Their bodies, or at least bodies that look exactly like them. The alternate Rick and Morty are dead, their bodies twisted and broken from the explosion. Morty is looking at his own corpse. It looks exactly like him, wearing the same clothes, with the same face, but dead and mangled. Rick hands Morty a shovel. They have to bury these bodies before anyone in the house finds them. So Morty carries his own dead body out to the backyard. The show plays sad, haunting music as Rick and Morty dig graves and bury themselves. Morty is crying while he does this. He's shaking. He has what's described as a 1,000-yard stare, which is when someone's eyes look empty and distant, like they're not really seeing what's in front of them anymore. This is what happens to people who experience something so horrible that their brain kind of shuts down to protect them from the full weight of what they're experiencing. After they finish burying the bodies, Rick goes back into the garage like nothing happened. But Morty stands there in the backyard for a moment, looking at the fresh grave he just dug for himself. Then he walks into the house in a daze. He looks around at the living room, at his family eating dinner and watching TV. They look exactly like his family. They sound like his family, but they're not his family. His real family is back in the Cronenberg dimension, probably fighting for survival in a world full of monsters. This family is the family of the Morty who just died, the Morty that our Morty just buried in the backyard. Morty sits down on the couch next to his sister, Summer. She asks if he's okay. He says he's fine, but his face shows that he's absolutely not fine. He's shell-shocked, which means he's in a kind of emotional shutdown from experiencing something too overwhelming to process. The episode ends with Morty just sitting there, staring at nothing, trying to accept that this is his life now. Let's break down what just happened to Morty's brain and sense of reality. First, Morty made a selfish choice. He wanted a love potion so Jessica would like him without him having to actually talk to her or be himself. This choice led to the destruction of his entire world. Billions of people turned into monsters because of him. That's an impossible weight of guilt for anyone to carry, let alone a 14-year-old kid. Morty caused an apocalypse. He destroyed the world. Even though Rick was the one who made the potions and kept messing up the antidotes, Morty knows he started this by asking for the love potion in the first place. Second, Morty had to abandon his real family. His actual mom, dad, and sister are stuck in that Cronenberg world forever. He'll never see them again. They think he's dead because the Cronenberg versions of Rick and Morty are still there. Morty's original dimension gets shown in a later episode, and we see that Cronenberg Rick and Cronenberg Morty took our Rick and Morty's place there. But our Morty's real family doesn't know he's alive in another dimension. He had to leave them behind to save himself. Third, Morty had to bury his own corpse. Think about what that means. Death is abstract for most 14-year-olds. It's something that happens to other people, something far away. But Morty had to hold his own dead body, dig a grave, and bury himself. He looked at his own face, dead and cold. He knows exactly what he looks like when he's dead. He knows how heavy his own body is. This is the kind of experience that makes death very, very real in a way that's hard to come back from. Fourth, Morty now has to pretend to be someone he's not. The family he's living with isn't his family. They're the family of a dead Morty. Every time his mom hugs him, she's hugging him thinking he's her son, but he's not. He's a stranger who took her son's place. Every conversation, every dinner, every normal family moment is based on a lie. Morty can never tell them the truth. He has to carry this secret forever. Fifth, Morty's entire sense of what's real just got destroyed. He used to think he lived in one solid reality where things mattered and had weight, but now he knows he's just one Morty out of infinite Mortys. His family isn't special or unique. They're just one version out of infinite versions. Nothing is permanent, because Rick can just jump to a new dimension whenever things go wrong. If Morty dies here, Rick could just find another dimension and replace that Morty. Nothing is sacred or irreplaceable anymore. The show makes it clear that this experience almost broke Morty. Later in the season, in an episode called "Ricksty Minutes," Morty shows Summer the graves in the backyard and tells her the truth about what happened. This is the first time Morty talks about it out loud to anyone. He kept this massive secret buried inside him for weeks or months. When Summer finds out and starts to have a breakdown about it, Morty has to be the one to help her deal with it, even though he's barely dealing with it himself. What's important to understand is that this trauma is completely different from the sexual assault trauma, but it's just as damaging in its own way. The assault hurt Morty's sense of physical safety and trust in other people. This dimension-jumping experience hurt Morty's sense of reality and meaning. It's like the universe showed Morty that nothing really matters, that everyone is replaceable, that there are no real consequences because you can always just escape to a new dimension. For a kid who already had anxiety and low self-esteem, this realization is devastating. If you're one Morty out of infinite Mortys, what makes you special? What makes anything you do matter? If Rick can just replace you by finding another dimension, why would he care if you died? If your family isn't really your family, just some alternate version of them, what does family even mean? These aren't just philosophical questions for Morty. They're real problems that affect how he sees himself and his life. The fact that Rick treats this so casually makes it worse. Rick acts like dimension hopping to replace dead versions of yourself is no big deal. He doesn't seem bothered by burying his own corpse. He doesn't seem to care that they abandoned their original family. He just moves on like it's a normal Tuesday. This teaches Morty that he's supposed to be able to handle this kind of thing easily, that being traumatized by it means he's weak or not cut out for adventures with Rick. So Morty tries to act like he's okay when he's really not. The episode also shows Morty that his mistakes have huge consequences. He wanted Jessica to like him, so he asked for a love potion, and that choice led to the end of the world. This creates a terrible fear in Morty going forward. What if his choices lead to more disasters? What if every time he wants something or tries to do something, it ends in catastrophe? This makes Morty second-guess himself constantly and makes his anxiety even worse. There's also the guilt of knowing that his real family is suffering because of him. In the Cronenberg dimension, his real mom and dad and sister are living in a nightmare world, fighting monsters every day. They're probably scared and struggling to survive. And that's Morty's fault. Every time Morty thinks about them, he has to remember that he caused their suffering and then abandoned them. That kind of guilt can eat away at a person from the inside. The image of Morty with the 1,000-yard stare, looking empty and disconnected, is the image of a traumatized kid. His brain is overwhelmed. He can't process what just happened in a healthy way because it's too big, too weird, too awful. So his mind kind of goes blank, goes numb, shuts down emotions to survive the moment. This is what happens during severe trauma. The brain protects itself by disconnecting from the full reality of what's happening. But that disconnection doesn't heal the trauma. It just pushes it down where it sits and festers and affects everything Morty does going forward. What makes this even more damaging is the timing. This happens right after the sexual assault episode. So Morty has now experienced 2 massive traumas within weeks of each other. He was sexually assaulted and never got help for it, And now he's experienced this bizarre dimension abandonment situation and isn't getting help for that either. These traumas are stacking on top of each other, each one making Morty more fragile and more damaged, and nobody is helping him deal with any of it. The show's creator, Dan Harmon, has said that he originally planned this episode to be the series finale. That's how big of a deal this dimension jump was supposed to be. It was meant to be the ultimate expression of the show's nihilistic worldview. Nothing matters. Everything is replaceable. There are no real consequences. But they used it in episode 6 of season 1 instead, which means Morty had to live with this trauma for the entire rest of the series so far. Every episode after this takes place in a dimension that isn't Morty's original home. Every interaction with his family is with people who aren't technically his real family. Morty carries this around with him always. He knows he's living a lie. He knows he buried himself in the backyard. He knows his real family is in a monster world. He knows he destroyed an entire planet. He knows reality isn't solid or real or meaningful in the way he used to think it was. And he has to just keep going to school and eating dinner and pretending everything is normal. This episode teaches Morty a lesson that will poison his psychology for the rest of the series. Nothing is permanent, nothing is sacred, and you can always escape consequences if you're willing to abandon your reality and take someone else's place. This is the opposite of the lesson a 14-year-old should be learning. Teenagers need to learn that their choices matter, that their actions have weight, that they're connected to the people and world around them. Instead, Morty learned that nothing matters and everything is meaningless. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. The combination of the sexual assault trauma and the dimension abandonment trauma happening so close together creates a foundation of damage that everything else will build on. Morty isn't starting from a healthy place anymore. He's starting from a place of being deeply hurt in two completely different ways, with zero support or help to heal from either experience. And when trauma piles up like this, when multiple terrible things happen close together without time or help to recover, it creates something specific that psychologists have a name for. A pattern of damage that's different from just experiencing one traumatic event. Section 4. Understanding complex PTSD, the clinical picture. When someone experiences one really terrible event, like a car accident or a natural disaster, and it affects them psychologically afterwards, that's what people usually think of when they hear about trauma disorders. They might have nightmares about the event, or feel scared when something reminds them of it, or have trouble sleeping. This is serious and real, but it's what we might call single event trauma. However, what Morty has been through is different. Morty didn't experience just one terrible thing. He experienced multiple terrible things, one after another, with no time to recover between them. And they keep happening because he's stuck in an ongoing situation with Rick where bad things continue to occur. When trauma happens over and over again, especially when it happens in a situation you can't escape from, it creates a different kind of damage. Instead of being hurt by one event, you're being hurt continuously, and your brain and emotions can't recover because the danger never really stops. This pattern creates something called complex PTSD, which means trauma that's complicated and layered, built up from many experiences over time rather than just one. The word complex here means there are many parts to it, many layers of damage, not just one simple injury. To understand what complex PTSD looks like, we need to look at the specific ways it shows up in someone's behavior and emotions. There are several key signs that show when someone has this kind of ongoing trauma damage, and Morty displays every single one of them throughout the series. These aren't just personality quirks or normal teenage behavior. They're responses to trauma that make perfect sense when you understand what Morty has been through. The first major sign is trouble controlling emotions. This doesn't mean just feeling sad or angry sometimes, which everyone does. This means emotions that explode suddenly and intensely, or emotions that shut down completely and go numb. Someone with this kind of trauma damage might seem fine one moment and then suddenly be screaming or crying the next. Or they might feel nothing at all when something emotional happens because their brain has learned to shut feelings off to protect itself. Morty shows both of these patterns. We see him go from calm to violently angry in seconds, and we also see him stare blankly with empty eyes when something horrible happens, unable to feel anything at all. Think about the episode Look Who's Purging Now in Season 2, Episode 9. Morty insists he doesn't have any anger inside him, that he's fine and calm. But when someone criticizes his feedback on a screenplay, Morty suddenly snaps and kills the person by pushing him downstairs. Rick even says before this happens that Morty has repressed rage, which means anger that's been pushed down and hidden but is still there, building up. When Morty denies having this rage, Rick tells him, "Spoken like a person with repressed rage." This is exactly what trauma does. It creates intense emotions that get pushed down until they explode unexpectedly. Later in that same episode, when Morty gets a suit of armor with weapons, he goes on a massive killing spree, slaughtering tons of people while screaming. At first, he's hesitant, but then he finds what the show calls his inner rage and just loses control completely. After it's over, the show tells us Morty reflects on what he did with shame, meaning he feels terrible about it afterwards. But in the moment, he couldn't control himself. His emotions took over completely. This is emotional dysregulation, the inability to keep emotions at a manageable level. We also see Morty shut down emotionally. At the end of Rick Potion number 9, when he's burying his own corpse, Morty has what the show describes as a 1,000-yard stare. His face is blank. He's there physically, but not emotionally. This is called dissociation, which means disconnecting from reality or from your own emotions as a way to survive something too awful to fully experience. Morty's brain is protecting him by making him numb, by making the experience feel less real. This happens to people with complex PTSD a lot. They space out, feel disconnected from their own body, or feel like what's happening isn't really happening to them. The second major sign is feeling bad about yourself in deep, permanent ways. This isn't just low self-esteem like Morty had at the beginning. This is believing you're worthless, broken, or fundamentally damaged. People with complex PTSD often think they deserved the bad things that happened to them, or that there's something wrong with them that made the trauma happen. They feel guilty and ashamed, even when things weren't their fault. Morty shows this constantly. Morty already had low self-esteem before the traumas, but after everything that happens, it gets much worse. He believes he's stupid because Rick tells him so repeatedly, and because he struggles in school. He believes he ruins everything, because when he tries to help or make decisions, things often go catastrophically wrong. In Rick Potion number 9, Morty knows he's responsible for turning the whole world into monsters. Even though Rick was the one who made the potions and kept messing up the cures, Morty carries the guilt of knowing he started it by asking for the love potion. This guilt becomes part of how Morty sees himself, as someone who causes disasters. There's an episode in Season 3 called Rest and Ricklaxation, where a machine literally separates what Morty thinks are the toxic, bad parts of himself from the healthy, good parts. What's revealing is which parts Morty considers toxic. The toxic version of Morty has his morals, his empathy, his emotional sensitivity, his anxiety, and his insecurity. The healthy version is confident, but also selfish, manipulative, and doesn't care about hurting people. This shows that Morty has learned to see his good qualities, caring about others, having a conscience, as weaknesses and problems. He thinks the parts of himself that make him kind are actually the parts that are wrong with him. This is a deeply messed up view of himself that comes directly from trauma. The third major sign is having trouble with relationships. People with complex PTSD often have a hard time trusting others. Or they trust too much and get hurt. Or they become overly dependent on someone even when that person hurts them. They might push people away because they're afraid of being hurt, or cling to people desperately because they're afraid of being abandoned. Morty shows several of these patterns, especially in his relationship with Rick. Morty is extremely dependent on Rick, even though Rick treats him terribly. He desperately wants Rick's approval and will do almost anything to get it. At the same time, Morty knows Rick is dangerous and hurts him, but he can't seem to break away. This is a trauma response. When you're hurt by someone you depend on, your brain gets confused because the person who should protect you is the same person hurting you. We'll talk more about this specific pattern later, but it's important to know it's a common sign of complex PTSD. Morty also has trouble connecting with people his own age. He can barely talk to Jessica, his crush, without stammering and freezing up. He doesn't seem to have real friends at school. His closest relationship is with his sister Summer, and even that is complicated by all the shared trauma they experience. Morty's ability to form healthy, normal relationships has been damaged by everything he's been through. The fourth major sign is being constantly on alert, always expecting danger. This is called hypervigilance. People with complex PTSD have a hard time relaxing because their brain is always scanning for threats, always ready to react to danger. They're jumpy and easily startled. They have trouble sleeping. They feel like they can't let their guard down. The show describes Morty as easily stressed and constantly anxious, which are signs of this constant state of alert. Morty stammers and stutters more when he's nervous, which is most of the time. This speech difficulty gets worse as the series goes on and he experiences more trauma. His brain is so busy being on alert and worrying about danger that it interferes with his ability to speak smoothly. He's always worried about what might go wrong, what Rick might do next, what danger they might encounter. He can't just be a normal kid because his nervous system is stuck in emergency mode. The fifth major sign is having flashbacks and intrusive memories of the traumatic events. This is when the trauma suddenly feels like it's happening again, right now, not like a memory from the past. Your brain and body react as if the danger is present, even when you're actually safe. For most of the series, the show doesn't explicitly show Morty having flashbacks, but in Season 8, Episode 1, called Summer of All Fears, the show finally makes this completely obvious. In this episode, Rick traps Morty and Summer in a computer simulation for 17 years as punishment for taking his phone charger. In the simulation, Morty goes to prison, joins the fire department, then joins the military and fights in a war where he watches his fellow soldiers die horribly. When Morty comes back to the real world, he's traumatized by these experiences. The show explicitly has Morty say the words, "I have PTSD." This is the first time in the entire series that Morty directly names what's wrong with him. We then see Morty have an actual flashback. A shattered beer bottle triggers him. The sound or sight of it reminds him of something from the war in the simulation. And suddenly, Morty is back in the war zone in his mind. The show displays the flashback on screen, so we can see what Morty is seeing. Soldiers dying, explosions, chaos. Morty isn't in the war zone anymore, but his brain is making him experience it again like it's happening right now. This is a textbook example of a PTSD flashback. What's important about this episode is that Rick says something revealing. He mentions that this new PTSD from the war makes Morty different from his normal PTSD version. This means Rick is aware that Morty already had PTSD before the simulation. The show is telling us that Morty has been traumatized all along, and the Matrix War just added another layer on top of existing trauma. This confirms what we can see throughout the series. Morty has been displaying trauma responses for years. A real psychologist named Dr. Kelly Sheehan was interviewed about Rick and Morty and specifically talked about Morty's psychology. She said that Morty seems like a naive, impressionable adolescent who is experiencing many negative effects as a result of family conflict. She pointed out that Morty is at an impressionable age where there's a great deal of brain and physiological development going on. She called it an important time of growth, but also a vulnerable time, and said that warmth and stability aid in psychological development, but Morty gets neither of those things from his parents, and certainly not from Rick. Dr. Sheehan explained that it seems like Morty's parents and Rick possibly didn't provide him with a stable, warm household, and this could be resulting in anxiety and stress. This is important because she's identifying that Morty's environment is what's causing his psychological problems. He's not just naturally anxious. He's anxious because of what he's experiencing. She specifically says the trauma is ongoing and coming from his family situation, which is exactly what causes complex PTSD rather than simple PTSD. The show itself describes Morty as suffering from anxiety and is easily stressed, largely as a result of traumatic experiences. Notice it says experiences, plural, not just one experience. The show is telling us directly that Morty has been through multiple traumatic things, and that's why he's the way he is. It also describes him as easily distressed, which matches what we see. Morty gets overwhelmed and upset quickly because his nervous system is already maxed out from ongoing trauma. Another quote from the show's descriptions of Morty says he experiences a lot of death and destruction on his adventures with Rick, and these experiences are slowly taking their toll on Morty, robbing more and more of his optimism. This describes the process of trauma accumulation. Each new bad thing chips away at Morty's mental health. He's losing hope, losing the ability to see good in the world, becoming more damaged over time. This is the progression of complex PTSD. It builds and worsens as more trauma gets added. The show is also clear that Morty grows as a person and becomes more assertive and smarter because of the adventures, which sounds like it could be good. But then it adds that this growth comes at the price of him becoming more traumatized and unhappy and his morality damaged by his adventures with his grandfather. This is crucial. Morty is getting more capable, but he's also getting more psychologically damaged. He's learning skills and becoming tougher, but he's losing his mental health and his sense of right and wrong. This trade-off is not worth it. A kid shouldn't have to become traumatized to become more capable. Complex PTSD happens specifically when someone experiences repeated trauma in a situation they can't escape from, usually in a relationship where they're dependent on the person hurting them. This is exactly Morty's situation. He can't escape from Rick because Rick controls the portal gun. The only way to get home from adventures is if Rick decides to take them home. Morty is completely dependent on Rick for survival during their adventures. And the trauma isn't one event that's over, it's ongoing. Rick keeps taking Morty on dangerous adventures where terrible things happen. The trauma doesn't stop. It continues, week after week, episode after episode. When trauma is ongoing like this, the brain can't heal because it never gets a break from being in danger. Imagine trying to heal a cut on your arm, but every day someone cuts it open again before it can fully heal. Eventually, you don't just have a cut, you have permanent scar tissue, permanent damage. That's what's happening to Morty's psychology. Each new trauma happens before he's recovered from the last one, so the damage builds and becomes permanent. Doctor. Sheehan talked about how adolescence is an especially vulnerable time for this kind of damage. She said that the effects of divorce are magnified in adolescence, referring to Morty's parents separating in season 3. But this principle applies to all trauma. It hits harder when you're a teenager because your brain is still developing. The teenage brain is forming important connections and patterns that will last into adulthood. When trauma happens during this time, it gets wired into the brain in ways that are hard to change later. Morty is 14 years old during most of the series. His brain is still growing and forming. The experiences he has now are literally shaping how his brain develops. Every trauma, every scary adventure, every time Rick puts him in danger or belittles him, it's affecting how Morty's brain grows. This is why complex PTSD in teenagers is so serious. It's not just damaging an already formed person, it's damaging a person while they're still being formed. It's like building a house on a cracked foundation. Everything built on top will be unstable. The combination of all these signs, emotional explosions and numbness, deep feelings of worthlessness, relationship problems, constant anxiety and alertness, and flashbacks to traumatic events, creates the full picture of complex PTSD. Morty has all of these symptoms. They're not subtle or hidden. They're displayed clearly throughout the show and episode after episode. The sexual assault, the dimension abandonment, and all the other traumas we haven't even discussed yet have created this pattern of damage. What makes complex PTSD different from regular PTSD is that it's not just about one event that you remember and react to. It's about ongoing harm that changes who you are as a person. It affects your personality, your sense of self, your ability to function in daily life. Morty isn't just a kid who had some bad experiences. He's a kid whose personality and development are being actively damaged by continued trauma. And the worst part is that the trauma isn't coming from strangers or random events. It's coming from his grandfather, someone who is supposed to care about him and keep him safe. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. This brings us to perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Morty's psychological situation. The reason he can't escape isn't just that Rick controls the portal gun or that. Morty depends on Rick to survive their adventures. There's something deeper keeping Morty trapped in this harmful situation. Something that happens to people with complex PTSD when the person hurting them is also the person they depend on. Psychologists have a specific name for this pattern, and understanding it is the key to understanding why Morty stays with Rick no matter how much damage it causes. Section 5. Trauma Bonding. The Rick and Morty Dynamic. One of the most confusing things about abuse is why people stay in situations that hurt them. From the outside, it seems simple. If someone is hurting you, just leave. But when you're actually in that situation, especially when you depend on the person who's hurting you, leaving feels impossible. There's a specific pattern that happens when someone experiences cycles of abuse mixed with moments of kindness from the same person. These cycles create a powerful emotional attachment that's hard to break, even when you know the relationship is harmful. This is exactly what's happening between Rick and Morty. Think about how their relationship works. Rick insults Morty constantly. He calls him stupid, tells him he's worthless, makes fun of his stammering and his struggles in school. Rick puts Morty in deadly danger regularly, often on purpose, and doesn't seem to care if Morty gets hurt or traumatized. Rick controls every aspect of their adventures because he has the portal gun and all the weapons and technology. Morty has to do what Rick says or he might die, or get left behind in another dimension, or face some other horrible consequence. This is the abuse part of the cycle. But then, sometimes, Rick does something that seems caring. He kills King Jellybean to avenge Morty after the assault. He occasionally shows pride in Morty or gives him a compliment. He saves Morty's life when Morty is in danger, even though Rick was often the one who put Morty in that danger in the first place. He has moments where he seems to actually care about Morty and want to protect him. These moments of kindness are rare, but they're powerful because they come after so much cruelty. This is the reward part of the cycle. When someone hurts you most of the time, but is occasionally nice to you, your brain gets confused. The kindness feels extra special because you've been starved for it. You start to feel grateful for basic decency because you're so used to being treated badly. You think, see, Rick does care about me. He saved me. He avenged me. He must actually love me, even if he doesn't show it most of the time. You start making excuses for the abuse and focusing on the rare good moments instead. This pattern creates what psychologists call trauma bonding, though Morty wouldn't use that term. It's an emotional attachment that forms specifically because of the cycle of abuse and reward. The person being hurt becomes attached to the person hurting them, almost like an addiction. You keep hoping for those moments of kindness, and you'll endure the abuse to get them. You start to believe you need this person, that you can't survive without them, even though they're the one causing most of your suffering. Let's look at specific examples of how Rick abuses Morty. In the very first episode, Rick drags Morty out of school in the middle of class to go on an adventure. Morty's parents don't want this to happen, but Rick doesn't care. He lies to them, manipulates them, and takes Morty anyway. On that first adventure, Rick gives Morty seeds that Morty has to smuggle through interdimensional customs by hiding them in his body in a very uncomfortable place. When Morty protests, Rick doesn't care. He just demands Morty do it. Throughout the series, Rick constantly tells Morty he's stupid. He mocks Morty's ideas, he ignores Morty's feelings. In Season 1, Episode 2, called Lawnmower Dog, Rick invades Morty's math teacher's dreams to make the teacher give Morty good grades automatically, whether Morty shows up to class or not. This seems helpful on the surface, but Rick does it so Morty's parents won't complain about Morty missing school for adventures. Rick isn't helping Morty learn or succeed. He's just removing obstacles to his own plans. Rick uses Morty as what he calls a cloaking device. In the show, it's explained that Rick's genius brainwaves can be detected by his enemies, but Morty's brainwaves are the opposite. They're described as canceling out Rick's genius waves. So Rick brings Morty on adventures specifically to hide his own presence. Morty isn't there because Rick enjoys his company or wants to spend time with him. Morty is there because he's useful as a tool. Rick literally uses his grandson as a human shield for his brainwaves. In Season 8, Episode 1, the most recent example we have, shows just how little Rick values Morty's well-being. Rick traps both Morty and Summer in a computer simulation for 17 years. 17 years of their lives experiencing prison, war, death, and trauma because they took his phone charger. Think about that. A phone charger. That's a minor annoyance that Rick punishes with nearly 2 decades of simulated suffering. And Rick didn't even mean for it to last that long. He fell asleep and left them in there by accident. He was so unconcerned about their well-being that he just forgot about them. Rick also tampers with Morty's memories. There's an entire episode called Morty's Mind Blowers in Season 3 that shows Rick has been removing Morty's memories of traumatic events, but he saves them in a room instead of deleting them completely. When Morty asks Rick to remove painful memories, Rick does it, but then sometimes he shows Morty those memories again later, just to mess with him or prove a point. Rick controls not just Morty's present experiences, but even his memories of the past. The physical abuse is clear too. Rick drags Morty into situations where Morty gets hurt, scared, or traumatized regularly. In the Vat of Acid episode from Season 4, Rick creates an elaborate torture scenario just to prove to Morty that Rick's ideas are better than Morty's ideas. Rick tricks Morty into thinking he has a device that lets him save and reload his life like a video game. But really, Morty is killing alternate versions of himself over and over. When Morty falls in love with a girl and has a whole relationship with her, Rick's device erases all of it. Then, Rick reveals the horrible truth about what Morty has actually been doing, just to make Morty feel terrible and prove Rick was right. This is psychological torture designed to break down Morty's confidence in his own judgment. So why does Morty stay? Why doesn't he just refuse to go on adventures? This is where the other side of the cycle comes in. The moments when Rick shows something that looks like care. Rick kills King Jellybean. This is huge for Morty. After being assaulted, Morty sees Rick figure out what happened and then take revenge. Rick didn't have to do that. He chose to go back and kill King Jellybean specifically because of what he did to Morty. This shows Morty that Rick does care, that Rick will protect him, that Rick values him enough to kill for him. This one act of protection makes Morty feel like maybe Rick does love him in his own way. Rick saves Morty's life many times. Yes, Rick usually put Morty in danger in the first place, but when Morty is about to die, Rick often swoops in and saves him. From Morty's perspective, Rick keeps saving him. Rick could leave him to die, but doesn't. This feels like proof that Rick wants him alive, that Morty matters to Rick. Rick occasionally gives Morty compliments or moments of apparent pride. These are rare, but when they happen, they mean everything to Morty because he's so desperate for approval. Rick might say Morty did well on something or show a moment of respect for Morty's capabilities. These tiny crumbs of validation are incredibly powerful when you're starving for them. Rick sometimes shows vulnerability to Morty. In Season 2, Episode 3, called Autoerotic Assimilation, Morty finds Rick in the garage after Rick's girlfriend Unity left him. Rick has tried to kill himself. Morty sees Rick at his lowest point, sees that Rick is suffering and broken. This makes Morty feel like he needs to protect Rick, like Rick needs him. It creates a sense of responsibility. If Morty leaves, who will take care of Rick? Who will stop Rick from hurting himself? The adventures themselves can be exciting and amazing sometimes. Rick takes Morty to incredible places, shows him wonders across the universe, gives him experiences no other kid could ever have. Yes, these adventures often end in trauma, but they start out feeling special and exciting. Morty gets to feel important, gets to be part of something bigger than his boring life at school. This is intoxicating for a kid who feels worthless most of the time. These moments of kindness, protection, excitement, and connection are scattered throughout the abuse like treats you give an animal to train it. They're unpredictable. Morty never knows when Rick will be cruel or kind. This unpredictability makes the kindness even more powerful because Morty is always hoping for it, always trying to earn it. He thinks if he can just be useful enough, smart enough, brave enough, then Rick will be nice to him more often. This is the trap. Morty's brain starts to depend on those rare moments of approval and care from Rick. They become like a drug he's addicted to. He'll endure incredible abuse just to get those few seconds of Rick seeming proud of him or protecting him. And because the kindness is unpredictable, Morty can't just give up on getting it. He always thinks the next adventure might be the one where Rick is finally consistently nice to him, where Rick finally shows he really cares. There's another layer to this trap. Rick himself is scared of Morty leaving. The show makes it clear that Rick is terrified that Morty will abandon him. This is why Rick clings to him and pushes him away at the same time. Rick's own psychology is damaged. He's lost everyone he's loved before, and he's terrified of losing. Morty too. But Rick doesn't know how to love in a healthy way. So instead of being kind to keep Morty close, Rick tries to control every aspect of Morty's life to prevent Morty from having any way to leave. Rick isolates Morty from normal life by pulling him out of school constantly. He undermines Morty's relationship with his parents by showing them that Rick is more important, that Morty needs Rick more than he needs them. He makes Morty dependent on him for survival during adventures. He damages Morty's self-esteem so Morty doesn't believe he could survive without Rick. This is calculated, whether Rick realizes it consciously or not. Rick is making sure Morty can't leave. The portal gun is the physical symbol of this control. Only Rick can work the portal gun. Only Rick can get them home from adventures. Only Rick can access other dimensions. If Morty tried to leave, tried to stay home, and refused to go on adventures, Rick would still control where the whole family can go and what dimensions they live in. Morty saw this in Rick Potion number 9. When things went wrong, Rick just found a new dimension and moved them there. Morty couldn't stop it. He has no power in this relationship. Morty's desperate need for approval makes this worse. Morty wants so badly to be seen as smart, capable, and valuable. Rick is a genius, maybe the smartest person in the universe. If Rick approves of Morty, it must mean Morty is actually worth something. If Rick thinks Morty is useful, it must mean Morty isn't just the stupid kid everyone at school thinks he is. So Morty keeps trying to earn Rick's approval, even though Rick rarely gives it, and when he does, it's temporary and conditional. Dr. Sheehan, the psychologist who analyzed the show, said that Rick didn't provide Morty with a stable, warm household, and this could be resulting in anxiety and stress. But it's more than just stress. What Rick is doing is creating a relationship where Morty can't feel secure or safe, but also can't leave. Morty is trapped in a cycle where he depends on Rick for survival, desperately seeks Rick's approval, occasionally gets moments that feel like love, but mostly experiences cruelty and danger. This cycle rewires Morty's brain. He starts to believe this is what relationships look like. He starts to think that love means someone hurting you most of the time, but occasionally showing they care. He learns that his own needs and feelings don't matter as much as Rick's plans. He learns to make himself smaller, quieter, more obedient to avoid Rick's anger or mockery. He learns that abuse is the price you pay for those rare moments of connection. The show describes Morty as easily manipulated, and now we can see why. It's not that Morty is naturally gullible or stupid. It's that he's been trained through this cycle to ignore his own instincts and defer to Rick. When Rick tells Morty something is fine or safe, even when Morty's gut says it's not, Morty has learned to trust Rick's judgment over his own. When Rick promises something will work out, even when it clearly won't, Morty wants to believe him because believing Rick means maintaining hope that Rick actually cares about him. Morty can't recognize this relationship as abusive because abuse is all he knows from Rick, and the moments of kindness make him believe the abuse isn't real or doesn't count. He makes excuses. Rick is teaching me to be stronger. Rick is trying to prepare me for a dangerous universe. Rick saves me when it really matters. Rick killed someone who hurt me, so he must love me. These excuses let Morty survive psychologically in a situation he can't physically escape. What makes this even more damaging is that Morty is 14. This is when kids are supposed to be learning what healthy relationships look like, learning to set boundaries, learning to value themselves. Instead, Morty is learning that his value comes from how useful he is to others, that love is conditional and unpredictable, that he should accept cruelty as normal, and that he doesn't have the right to protect himself or say no. This damaged understanding of relationships will affect every relationship Morty has going forward. He won't know what healthy love looks like because he's being taught the wrong lessons during the exact years when his brain is forming its templates for how relationships work. The trauma bond with Rick is becoming the model for how Morty thinks connection works. The most insidious part is that this cycle makes Morty blame himself when things go wrong. When Rick is cruel, Morty thinks it's because he messed up or wasn't good enough. When Rick is kind, Morty thinks he finally earned it by being useful. This keeps Morty always trying harder, always accepting more abuse, always hoping that if he can just be better, Rick will consistently treat him well. But that's not how this cycle works. Rick's behavior isn't based on what Morty does. It's based on Rick's own damaged psychology and his need to control Morty while also depending on him. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. What Morty doesn't understand is that this cycle of abuse and occasional kindness is creating more than just emotional attachment. It's literally changing how Morty's personality develops, how his emotions work, and how he handles his anger. And nowhere is this damage more visible than in the moments when Morty's carefully controlled emotions finally break free and he becomes exactly what he claims he's not: violent, rageful, and completely out of control. Section 6. The Repressed Rage. Look who's purging now. One of the strangest things about Morty is that he insists he doesn't have any anger. If you ask Morty whether he's angry inside, he'll deny it completely. He sees himself as someone who's scared and anxious, sure, but not angry. He thinks of himself as good-natured and peaceful, someone who doesn't want to hurt people. And on the surface, that's how Morty acts most of the time. Nervous, stammering, trying to do the right thing. But underneath all that fear and politeness, there's a massive amount of rage that Morty has been pushing down and ignoring. And when that rage finally comes out, it's terrifying. The episode that shows this most clearly is Season 2, Episode 9, called Look Who's Purging Now. Rick and Morty land on a planet that looks peaceful and nice, with villages and people who seem friendly. But they arrive on a special day called the Festival, which happens once a year. During the festival, all crime is legal for one night. People can do whatever they want without any consequences. They can steal, destroy property, hurt people, even kill. The show is making fun of a movie series called The Purge, which has the same idea. When Rick realizes what's happening, he's excited. He wants to stay and watch the chaos. Morty is disgusted by the whole thing. He doesn't understand why people would want to hurt each other, and he definitely doesn't want to participate. He thinks the festival is horrible and wrong. Then Morty sees a young woman named Arthricia being chased by people trying to hurt her. Morty's instinct is to help her, so he insists they save her. This is classic Morty, trying to do the right thing, trying to help someone in danger. But Arthricia tricks them. She steals their spaceship and shoots Rick, leaving them stranded on the planet during the festival. Now Rick and Morty are in danger themselves, surrounded by people who are allowed to kill them without any punishment. They need to find a place to hide until the festival is over. They end up at a lighthouse where an old man lives. Rick needs to use equipment at the lighthouse to call for help, so they have to spend time there waiting. The lighthouse keeper is working on a screenplay, which is a script for a movie. He's very proud of this screenplay and wants feedback on it. Morty tries to be polite and listen, but the screenplay is terrible. It's boring and badly written. The lighthouse keeper asks Morty what he thinks, and Morty tries to give honest but gentle criticism. He points out that the story starts with a scene from 3 weeks earlier, instead of starting where the story actually begins. This is a writing technique that the show's creator Dan Harmon has said he hates, so Morty is echoing that opinion. The lighthouse keeper gets really upset and defensive about this criticism. He starts yelling at Morty about how Morty doesn't understand storytelling and is being too harsh. The lighthouse keeper is clearly very insecure about his writing, and this is when something inside Morty snaps. Morty suddenly gets very angry. He tells the lighthouse keeper that he's not a bad person just because the lighthouse keeper is insecure about his writing. Then Morty pushes the lighthouse keeper down a long flight of stairs. The lighthouse keeper falls all the way down and dies from the fall. Morty just killed someone. Rick is standing there watching, and the show tells us Rick is astonished by what just happened. Rick didn't expect Morty to do that. Morty, the kid who always wants to help people and do the right thing, just killed someone over a screenplay criticism. This moment is important because it happens before anything else violent occurs in the episode. Before this, Rick had been telling Morty that if they're going to survive the festival, Morty will need to harness his repressed rage. Rick can see something in Morty that Morty can't see in himself. When Rick says this, Morty denies it completely. He says, "I don't have any." He genuinely believes he's not an angry person. And Rick responds, "Spoken like a person with repressed rage." Rick understands something crucial about Morty. Morty has been pushing down huge amounts of anger, and it's building up inside him like pressure in a bottle. When you push feelings down instead of dealing with them, they don't go away. They just get compressed and hidden until something triggers them and they explode out all at once. That's what happens with the lighthouse keeper. One small insult, one moment of someone being annoying, and all that buried anger comes rushing out in violence. After they leave the lighthouse, Rick calls for help, and the help arrives in the form of 2 suits of high-tech armor with weapons. These suits make Rick and Morty incredibly powerful. They can fly, they have laser weapons, they're almost invincible. When a mob of people from the festival tries to attack them, Rick immediately starts killing them. At first, Morty is hesitant. He doesn't want to kill people even though they're trying to kill him. But then something changes. The show tells us that Morty finds his inner rage. Suddenly, Morty starts slaughtering the mob. He's screaming and laughing as he kills people. His suit has weapons that track how many people he's killed, and the number keeps going up. He kills everyone in the mob. Not just enough to escape, but everyone. He's not defending himself anymore. He's releasing rage. The violence feels good to him in a sick way, because he's finally letting out all the anger he's been holding in. Later in the episode, they find Arthricia again and learn she wants revenge on the rich people who control the festival. She explains that the festival only exists because wealthy people want the poor people to kill each other. Rick gives Arthricia Morty's armor suit so she can get her revenge. But Morty, still riding the high of his violent rampage, wants to kill Arthricia right there. He's angry at her for stealing their ship. He's drunk on violence and wants more of it. Rick has to physically stop Morty and calm him down. After everything is over and they're heading home, Morty thinks about what he did, and the show tells us he reflects on the rampage with shame. Now that the rage has passed, Morty feels horrible about all the killing. He's ashamed of himself. He doesn't understand why he did it or how he could lose control like that. This shame makes Morty want to forget about the rage, to push it back down and pretend it doesn't exist. But that just continues the cycle. The anger gets buried again, building up until the next time it explodes. Rick tries to make Morty feel better by revealing that he hid a chemical called purginol in a candy bar that Morty ate earlier. Purginol is described as amplifying a person's violent tendencies. Rick tells Morty that the violence wasn't his fault. It was the chemical making him act that way. This is Rick giving Morty an excuse, a way to avoid taking responsibility for his actions. And Morty seems relieved to believe this explanation. But here's the problem. Morty killed the lighthouse keeper before he got the armor, before the rampage, probably before the purginol even fully kicked in. That murder was all Morty, no chemical excuse. Morty has real rage inside him that has nothing to do with any drug. The purginol might have made the rampage worse or easier, but the anger was already there. Rick's explanation is actually a form of lying to Morty, letting Morty avoid dealing with the real issue. He has serious rage that he's not addressing. We see this pattern again in Season 3, Episode 2, called Rickmancing the Stone. Morty's parents have just gotten divorced, and Morty is having a really hard time with it. Instead of talking about his feelings or getting help dealing with the divorce, Morty escapes to a post-apocalyptic planet that's like the Mad Max movies. On this planet, people fight in gladiator-style battle. Morty enters these battles and starts killing people violently. While he's killing, Morty envisions the people he's fighting as his father, Jerry. In his mind, he's not killing random strangers. He's killing his dad, over and over. He screams things like, "Tell her you want to stay married or get on with your life. Whatever you do, stop being a baby and act like a man." He yells, "Who else wants some? Who wants to be my pussy of a dad today?" Morty is taking all his anger about his parents' divorce, all his frustration with his father's weakness, and expressing it through violence against people who have nothing to do with his actual problems. After one of these fights, Rick tells Morty that violence is therapeutic for him. This is Rick recognizing that Morty is using violence to process emotions he can't handle in healthier ways. But being therapeutic doesn't mean it's good or healthy. Morty is learning to deal with emotional pain by hurting others, which is a terrible coping strategy that will damage him long term. Eventually, Morty himself admits that he wants to take his baggage out on unrelated people, but realizes we could do that forever without actually solving anything. So why does Morty have all this rage? Where does it come from? Think about everything Morty has been through. He was sexually assaulted and never got to talk about it or process it. He destroyed his entire world and had to bury his own corpse. He's constantly put in danger by Rick. He's insulted and belittled regularly. His parents are dysfunctional and got divorced. He feels powerless almost all the time. He can't control where he goes, what happens to him, or even his own memories because Rick tampers with them. All of these experiences create anger. It's normal and natural to feel angry when you're hurt, when you're helpless, when you're treated badly. Anger is a healthy response to injustice and harm. The problem is that Morty has never been allowed to express this anger in healthy ways. He's never been told it's okay to be angry about what happened to him. He's never been given tools to process and release anger safely. Instead, Morty believes he's not supposed to be angry. Good people aren't angry in Morty's mind. So when he feels rage building up, he tells himself he doesn't feel it. He pushes it down. He buries it. He pretends it doesn't exist. This is what people mean when they talk about repressing emotions. You're feeling something real and powerful, but you refuse to acknowledge it, so it gets shoved into a hidden part of your mind. But repressed emotions don't disappear. They build up pressure, and eventually that pressure has to release somehow. For Morty, it releases in sudden, explosive violence. A small trigger, someone criticizing him, someone annoying him, an opportunity to fight, and all that buried rage comes flooding out at once. Morty goes from zero to murder instantly because he's not releasing anger gradually and healthily. He's storing it up until it explodes. This is actually a recognized trauma response. When people experience ongoing trauma and aren't allowed to express their feelings about it, those feelings get compressed inside them. The anger especially gets dangerous because anger is the emotion that makes you want to fight back, to protect yourself, to say no. When you can't use anger in healthy ways, like setting boundaries or standing up for yourself, it turns into destructive rage that comes out sideways at the wrong targets. Morty's violence during the purge and during the divorce shows that he's becoming dangerous, not just to himself, but to others. He's learning that violence feels good because it releases the pressure of all his buried emotions. This is setting up a terrible pattern, where Morty will increasingly turn to violence when he's overwhelmed by feelings he can't handle. And the more he does this, the easier it becomes, and the less bad he feels about it. The shame Morty feels afterwards is actually making things worse. When he feels ashamed, he wants to forget about what he did and push it away. This means he never actually processes the rage or figures out where it's coming from. He just feels bad, buries the memory, and waits for the next explosion. This cycle of repression, explosion, shame, and more repression is incredibly damaging to Morty's psychological development. What Morty needs is someone to tell him it's okay to be angry. It's normal to be furious about being assaulted, about destroying his world, about being constantly endangered and disrespected. The anger itself isn't the problem, it's how he's handling it. He needs healthy ways to express and release anger before it builds to the point of violence. He needs therapy, support, and tools for managing intense emotions. Instead, he has Rick telling him the violence isn't his fault and making excuses for him, which prevents Morty from ever addressing the real issue. The fact that Morty genuinely doesn't recognize his own rage is concerning. It shows how disconnected he's becoming from his own emotions. When you spend enough time pushing feelings down, you lose the ability to identify what you're actually feeling. Morty's self-awareness is damaged. He thinks he's not angry when he's full of rage. And if you can't recognize what you're feeling, you can't deal with it in healthy ways. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. This disconnection from his own emotions is part of a larger pattern where Morty is losing touch with himself. The trauma, the abuse, the constant chaos, it's all creating distance between who Morty really is and who he thinks he is. And this gap between his true self and his perceived self is about to become literal when Morty encounters a machine that can separate what he thinks are the bad parts of himself from the good parts, revealing just how twisted his self-image has become. Section 7. The Toxic Self. Rest and Ricklaxation. In Season 3, Episode 6, something happens that reveals just how damaged Morty's view of himself has become. The episode is called Rest and Ricklaxation, and it starts with Rick and Morty coming back from a really traumatic adventure. They're both exhausted and stressed out from everything they've been through. Rick decides they should go to an alien spa to relax and de-stress. At this spa, there's a special machine that's supposed to help people feel better by removing what they think are their toxic qualities, the parts of themselves they believe are holding them back or making them unhappy. The machine works by asking you what parts of yourself you think are toxic, bad, or problematic. Then it literally separates those parts from you and puts them in a different dimension. You get to be the version of yourself without all the things you hate about yourself. It sounds like it could be helpful, like getting rid of the parts of your personality that cause problems. But here's the crucial thing. The machine doesn't decide what's actually toxic or unhealthy. It only removes what you personally believe is toxic, and what Morty believes about himself is deeply messed up. When Morty uses the machine, it separates him into two versions. There's the version that gets to stay in the real world, which we'll call Healthy Morty, and there's the version that gets sent to the other dimension, which we'll call Toxic Morty. You would think that Toxic Morty would contain all the bad stuff, the rage we talked about, the trauma responses, the unhealthy coping mechanisms. But that's not what happens at all. Toxic Morty is the version that has Morty's moral compass. He's the one who cares about right and wrong, who feels bad when people get hurt, who wants to help others. Toxic Morty has empathy, which means he can understand and care about other people's feelings. He has emotional sensitivity, which means he feels things deeply and notices when others are suffering. He has what the show calls affective range, which means he can feel a wide variety of emotions: sadness, compassion, worry, guilt. Toxic Morty also contains all of Morty's anxiety and insecurity. So basically everything that makes Morty a good person, his kindness, his conscience, his ability to care about others, Morty views as toxic. These are the parts of himself that Morty wanted to get rid of. He thinks these qualities are bad, that they're weaknesses holding him back. Meanwhile, Healthy Morty is very different. He's confident and smooth with people. He doesn't stammer or get nervous. He can talk to Jessica easily and even starts dating her. He seems successful and capable, but he's also selfish and manipulative. He uses people to get what he wants. He makes jokes that objectify women, treating them like objects instead of people. He doesn't care if his actions hurt others. He has no moral compass. He'll do whatever benefits him without worrying about whether it's right or wrong. Healthy Morty acts a lot like Rick. He's confident, sarcastic, doesn't care about feelings, and treats everything like a game where only winning matters. He's become the kind of person who can function in Rick's world without getting hurt, but only by losing everything that made him Morty. He's lost his humanity to gain confidence. This split reveals something horrible about what the trauma and abuse have done to Morty's self-image. Morty has learned to see his best qualities as problems. His empathy, his ability to care about others. He thinks that's what's wrong with him. His moral sense, his knowledge of right and wrong, he thinks that's holding him back. His emotional sensitivity, his capacity to feel deeply, he thinks that's toxic. All the anxiety and insecurity he feels, which are actually normal responses to the trauma he's experienced, he thinks those are character flaws that need to be removed. Why does Morty think this way? Because Rick has taught him to think this way. Rick constantly shows that caring about others is weak. Rick demonstrates that morality doesn't matter. Rick mocks emotions and sensitivity. Rick rewards Morty when he acts more like Rick. when he's cold, when he doesn't care, when he just does whatever needs to be done without worrying about the consequences or who gets hurt. The show actually points this out directly. An analysis of this episode says that Morty has internalized Rick's defense mechanism, and that Morty's ideal self is frighteningly close to the persona Rick routinely affects as a defense mechanism. This means Morty has absorbed Rick's way of dealing with the world, pretending not to care, acting like nothing matters, pushing away emotions, and started to believe that this is what being healthy looks like. Rick pretends not to care about anything because he's been hurt so many times that acting like he doesn't care protects him from more pain. It's Rick's armor, his way of surviving in a universe that has traumatized him. But it's not actually healthy. It's a defense mechanism, a way of hiding vulnerability. And Morty has watched Rick use this defense and started to think it's strength instead of damage. Morty thinks if he could just not care like Rick, if he could just turn off his empathy and conscience like Rick seems to, then he wouldn't get hurt anymore. The problem is that Morty's caring nature, his empathy, his moral compass, these aren't weaknesses. They're actually his greatest strengths. They're what make him a good person. They're what keep him from becoming as damaged and destructive as Rick. But Morty can't see that anymore. The trauma and the constant message from Rick that caring is weakness has warped Morty's view of himself so badly that he thinks his goodness is the problem. This is one of the most tragic things about trauma and abuse. It doesn't just hurt you, it makes you see yourself wrong. It makes you blame yourself for being hurt. It makes you think that the parts of you that are actually good are the parts that are broken. Morty thinks if he was just tougher, less sensitive, less caring, then Rick's adventures wouldn't hurt him so much. He doesn't understand that the problem isn't his sensitivity. The problem is that he's being put in traumatic situations constantly. The episode shows what happens when these two versions of Morty exist separately. Healthy Morty becomes increasingly horrible. Without any conscience to guide him, he starts doing terrible things. He manipulates people, he lies, he uses his relationship with Jessica for selfish reasons. He becomes someone you wouldn't want to be around. Meanwhile, toxic Morty is stuck in the other dimension, desperate and miserable, because he has all the capacity for feeling, but he's powerless to do anything. Eventually, the show forces the two versions to merge back together. They can't stay separated because neither version is complete without the other. Healthy Morty needs the conscience and empathy to be a full person. Toxic Morty needs the confidence and capability to function. When they merge back, Morty is whole again, but the episode has revealed what he really thinks about himself deep down. The fact that the machine works based on self-evaluation is crucial. The show is making a point that you can't optimize personality like it's a computer program. You can't just delete the parts of yourself you don't like and expect to be better. The things Morty thinks are toxic, his ability to care, to feel, to know right from wrong, are actually essential parts of being human. Without them, healthy Morty is just an empty, selfish person going through the motions of life without any real meaning or connection. This episode also shows us that Morty has completely lost perspective on what healthy actually means. He thinks healthy means being like Rick, confident, uncaring, morally neutral. He thinks toxic means being vulnerable, emotional, and moral. This is backwards. A psychologist would tell you that having empathy is healthy. Having a conscience is healthy. Being able to feel emotions is healthy. What's toxic is pretending not to care, manipulating people, and ignoring your own feelings. But Morty has been so thoroughly damaged by his experiences and his relationship with Rick that he can't tell the difference anymore. He's internalized a completely twisted view of what strength and health look like. He thinks he needs to become more like Rick to survive, not understanding that becoming like Rick would actually destroy what's best about him. There's something else important here. Morty is 14 years old, and his sense of self is still forming. Teenagers are in the process of figuring out who they are, what they value, what kind of person they want to be. This is when you develop your identity. And Morty's identity is being shaped by trauma and abuse to believe that his good qualities are bad, and his capacity for harm is strength. This is going to have permanent effects on who Morty becomes as an adult. The episode plays this split for comedy in some ways. Healthy Morty doing ridiculous things, toxic Morty being overly emotional. But underneath the comedy is something really dark. We're watching a kid's self-image be so damaged that he literally wants to remove his own conscience and empathy. We're watching trauma convince someone that their humanity is a flaw. When Rick goes through the same machine, his split is different. Toxic Rick contains different things than toxic Morty does. This shows that what you consider toxic is personal and based on your own psychology and experiences. But Rick is an adult whose personality is already formed. Morty is still developing, still learning who he is. Having his self-image this damaged at 14 is much more dangerous than the same damage would be in an adult. After Morty merges back together, he doesn't seem to have learned anything from this experience. He doesn't realize that what he thinks is toxic about himself is actually valuable. He just goes back to his regular life, still carrying this twisted view of his own personality. The episode doesn't fix the problem. It just reveals it clearly for the audience to see. This damaged self-image connects to everything else we've discussed. The repressed rage, the trauma bonding with Rick, the complex PTSD symptoms. They're all part of a larger pattern where Morty is losing himself. He's being reshaped by trauma into someone who values the wrong things, who wants to be someone he shouldn't want to be, who sees his best qualities as flaws. And this process of losing himself, of being remade in Rick's image, isn't accidental. It's the inevitable result of everything Morty has experienced. When you're traumatized repeatedly by someone you depend on, when you're told constantly that caring is weak and emotions are problems, when you watch someone like Rick survive through coldness and detachment, you start to believe that's what you need to become. You start to think that if you could just be more like your abuser, you wouldn't be vulnerable to abuse anymore. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But becoming like your abuser doesn't protect you from abuse. It just means you've let the abuse change who you are at your core. And that's exactly what's happening to Morty. The trauma isn't just hurting him, it's fundamentally changing his personality, his values, and his sense of who he is. And according to the show's own creator, this transformation has a specific endpoint that's been planned from the beginning. Morty is being turned into the next Rick Sanchez. Section 8, Becoming Rick, the Developmental Corruption. The show's creator, Dan Harmon, has said something very specific about where Morty's story is headed. According to Harmon, Morty will one day be a new Rick. This isn't just a prediction or a theory, it's the planned direction for Morty's character. The show is deliberately transforming Morty from an anxious, moral, caring kid into someone who looks and acts like Rick. And we can watch this transformation happen slowly across the seasons if we pay attention to how Morty changes over time. In Season 1, Morty is terrified of almost everything. He doesn't want to go on adventures, he stammers constantly, he tries to avoid violence. When someone gets hurt, he feels terrible about it. He questions Rick's decisions and tries to do what he thinks is right, even when Rick tells him he's being stupid. Season 1 Morty still believes in good and evil, right and wrong, that actions have meaning and consequences matter. He's traumatized by the things that happened to him, but his core personality is still intact. By Season 2, we start to see changes. Morty is still anxious and still tries to do the right thing, but he's more willing to challenge Rick. He stands up for himself more often. He's less shocked by violence and death. The Purge episode shows he has rage inside him that can explode into violence. He's learning Rick's skills, how to use weapons, how to pilot spacecraft, how to survive dangerous situations. He's becoming more capable, but that capability is coming with a cost. Season 3 is where the transformation becomes really obvious. In the very first episode, called The Rick Shank Rickdemption, Morty is angry at Rick for abandoning the family. When Morty thinks Rick is threatening Summer's life, Morty comes close to killing Rick. This is huge. Morty is willing to kill his own grandfather to protect his sister. That's not something Season 1 Morty would have done. He's becoming more violent, more willing to cross lines, more comfortable with extreme actions. Later in Season 3, after his parents' divorce, Morty processes his emotions through violence in the Blood Dome. He kills people while imagining they're his father, screaming insults at them. He's using Rick's method of dealing with problems, violence, and avoidance, instead of dealing with his feelings in healthy ways. He's learning that when you're upset, you don't talk about it or process it, you just find something to destroy. By Season 4 and beyond, the changes are even more clear. There's a specific analysis of the show that tells people to watch The Old Man and the Seat and see how Morty talks exactly like Rick. In this episode and others from later seasons, Morty uses Rick's speech patterns, Rick's sarcasm, Rick's way of dismissing other people's feelings. He sounds like Rick, he acts like Rick. When he solves problems, he thinks like Rick. The show tells us directly that Morty is slowly losing himself because he has none of the life experience Rick has that occasionally stays his hand. This is a crucial point. Rick has lived for 70 years and experienced enough pain and loss that sometimes, rarely, he stops himself from doing terrible things. Rick occasionally shows mercy or kindness because his decades of experience taught him some limits. But Morty is adopting Rick's cold, cruel behavior without having Rick's lifetime of experience to temper it. Morty is becoming the worst parts of Rick without any of the wisdom or restraint that sometimes makes Rick pull back. By season 3, the show says Morty displays an uncanny degree of common sense, as well as a deep understanding of Rick's twisted mind. Morty doesn't just understand how Rick thinks anymore, he's starting to think the same way. He can predict what Rick will do. He can manipulate Rick by using Rick's own psychology against him. He's learned Rick so well that he's becoming Rick. The show describes Morty's character as a deconstruction of the kid sidekick archetype. This means the show is taking the usual story of a kid who goes on adventures with an adult mentor and showing what that would really do to the kid. In normal stories, the sidekick learns from the hero and becomes a better person. They gain confidence and skills, and it's all positive. But Rick and Morty shows the dark side. Yes, Morty is gaining confidence and skills, but he's also being damaged. The show says Morty grows as a person and becomes more assertive and smarter, which sounds good, but it comes at the price of him becoming more traumatized and unhappy and his morality damaged by his adventures with his grandfather. Think about what his morality damaged means. Morty's sense of right and wrong is being broken down. In season 1, Morty knew killing was wrong and tried to avoid it. By later seasons, Morty kills without much hesitation when he thinks it's necessary. In season 1, Morty cared deeply about not hurting innocent people. By later seasons, he's more willing to accept what's called collateral damage, when innocent people get hurt as a side effect of what you're doing, but you do it anyway because you want to achieve your goal. This moral damage happens gradually. Each adventure teaches Morty that morality is complicated, that there are no clear right answers, that sometimes you have to do bad things to survive. These lessons aren't wrong on their own. The world is complicated, and morality isn't always simple. But Morty is learning these lessons too young, in too extreme situations, from someone who has no moral compass himself. Rick doesn't teach Morty that morality is complex. Rick teaches Morty that morality is meaningless. Dr. Sheehan, the psychologist who analyzed the show, pointed out something critical about Morty's age. She said Morty is at an impressionable age when there's a great deal of brain and physiological development going on. She called it an important time of growth, but also a vulnerable time. What she means is that Morty's brain is still forming. The connections between brain cells, the patterns of thinking, the emotional responses, all of this is still being built during adolescence. When you're 14, your brain is like wet cement. Whatever shapes it during this time will harden into permanent patterns. If you grow up in a loving, stable environment, your brain develops healthy patterns for relationships, emotions, and decision-making. If you grow up in a traumatic, abusive environment like Morty's, your brain develops damaged patterns. And once those patterns harden, once you become an adult, they're very difficult to change. This is why what's happening to Morty is so serious. He's not just a kid being hurt. He's a kid whose personality is being formed by hurt. Every traumatic adventure, every insult from Rick, every time Morty has to choose between his morals and survival, it's wiring his brain in specific ways. He's learning that caring gets you hurt, that trusting people is dangerous, that the only way to survive is to be cold and smart, and always one step ahead of everyone else. These are Rick's survival strategies, and they're becoming Morty's brain patterns. The transformation shows up in small ways that build over time. Morty's stammer gets worse in some ways, but better in others. He stammers less when he's being cruel or sarcastic, more when he's trying to be vulnerable. His anxiety is still there, but he's developed Rick's way of hiding it behind sarcasm and mockery. His desire for Jessica's approval transforms into healthy Morty's manipulation of her, showing that Morty is learning to use people instead of genuinely connecting with them. Morty also starts to value the things Rick values. Intelligence becomes more important than kindness. Being right becomes more important than being good. Winning becomes more important than how you win. These are Rick's values, not the values Morty started with. But after years of Rick rewarding Morty for thinking this way and punishing Morty for being too soft or too moral, Morty has absorbed these values as his own. There's a specific comment about the show that says when Rick and Morty team up and get along, they cause more destruction than ever, and that getting along only reinforces their codependency and makes it harder for them to walk away from them. Relationship. This is important because it shows that even positive moments between Rick and Morty are harmful. When they work together well, when Morty successfully helps Rick with a plan, when they're functioning as a team, those moments teach Morty that being like Rick works. They reinforce the idea that Morty should become more like Rick. The show also points out that as Morty gains confidence and capability, he takes on Rick's mannerisms and his brutality. It's not just that Morty is learning skills, he's learning to be brutal. He's learning to not care when people get hurt. He's learning to see other people as tools or obstacles instead of as individuals who matter. This brutality is Rick's signature trait, and Morty is absorbing it like a sponge. What makes this transformation so tragic is that Morty doesn't realize it's happening. He doesn't wake up one day and decide to become like Rick. It happens gradually, through thousands of small moments where Rick's way of thinking makes more sense than Morty's original values. When caring about people gets Morty hurt, when trying to do the right thing leads to disaster, when Rick's cold logic keeps them alive while Morty's morality puts them in danger. Each of these moments teaches Morty's developing brain that Rick's way is better. This is called identification with the aggressor in psychology, though we can explain it more simply. When someone is hurting you and you can't escape, sometimes you start to become like them as a survival strategy. If you act like your abuser, maybe they'll hurt you less. If you think like them, you can predict what they'll do. If you adopt their values, you won't feel as much conflict about what they make you do. It's a defense mechanism, a way of surviving in a situation where you have no power. But here's the problem. Morty isn't just surviving anymore. He's being permanently changed. The person he's becoming isn't who he would have become if he'd grown up in a healthy environment. His personality, his values, his way of relating to others, all of it is being shaped by trauma and abuse during the exact years when these things are being formed for the rest of his life. The show's description of Morty says he's being transformed, but he lacks, quote, the life experience Rick has that occasionally stays his hand. This means Rick, after 70 years of living, has learned a few limits. Rick occasionally stops himself from doing the absolute worst thing. He occasionally shows mercy or care. But Morty is learning Rick's worst traits without learning any of Rick's hard-won wisdom. Morty is becoming a version of Rick who has all the cruelty and coldness, but none of the rare moments of restraint. Season by season, we can track Morty's progression from traumatized kid trying to stay moral to capable teenager who sometimes does questionable things to someone who increasingly resembles Rick in how he thinks and acts. This isn't character growth, it's character corruption. Morty isn't becoming a better version of himself. He's becoming a younger version of Rick, which means he's becoming someone damaged, isolated, and unable to form genuine connections with others. And this transformation is still happening. Morty is still only 14 or 15 by the later seasons. He's not done developing yet. Every new episode has the potential to push him further toward becoming Rick, or to pull him back toward his original self. But the trajectory is clear, and the show's creator has confirmed where it's going. Morty will one day be a new Rick. The damage isn't just temporary trauma that Morty might recover from, it's permanent personality reformation. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. This is perhaps the most devastating aspect of Morty's psychological profile. He's not just suffering from trauma symptoms that could potentially heal with therapy and support. He's being fundamentally reshaped into someone else entirely, into someone who resembles the person who traumatized him in the first place. And nowhere is the irreversibility of this damage more apparent than in an episode that forced Morty to confront the permanent consequences of his choices. An episode that would add yet another layer of psychological destruction to an already crumbling mind. Section 9. The Vat of Acid Trauma. Consequences without reset. In Season 4, Episode 8, something happens to Morty that represents a turning point in how much psychological damage one person can take before completely breaking. The episode is called The Vat of Acid Episode, and it starts with Rick and Morty doing a deal with some alien gangsters. These gangsters are supposed to trade valuable crystals with Rick, but they betray him and try to kill Rick and Morty. Rick's escape plan is to jump into a vat of acid, except the acid is fake, and there are tubes hidden in the vat so they can breathe. They float some fake bones to the surface to make it look like they died and dissolved in the acid. The plan works, but Morty hates it. After they escape, Morty tells Rick that the acid vat was a stupid idea. He says Rick never takes any of Morty's ideas seriously and always acts like Rick is the only smart one. Morty brings up an idea he's had before. What if Rick made a device that works like a save point in a video game? In video games, you can save your progress. Try something risky. And if it goes wrong, you reload from the save point and everything goes back to how it was. Morty wants this for real life, a device that lets him try things and reset if they don't work out. Rick refuses at first, saying he doesn't do time travel. But Morty keeps pushing, challenging Rick, basically calling him unable to create the device. This makes Rick angry enough that he agrees to build it just to prove Morty wrong. Rick creates what looks like a remote control with a save button and a reload button. He tells Morty it will let him save a moment in time and return to that moment whenever he wants. Morty takes the device without waiting for Rick to explain how it actually works. Morty immediately starts using the device for selfish things. He saves before talking to his teacher, then pulls down the teacher's pants as a prank. When the teacher gets mad, Morty just hits reload and he's back before he did it, so there are no consequences. He saves before jumping into a manhole to see what's down there. He uses it to sneak into the girls' locker room. He uses it to try every flavor of ice cream without having to pay for more than one. He uses it to attempt dangerous stunts and stupid pranks. Every time something goes wrong or he gets caught, he just reloads and it's like it never happened. This goes on for a while, with Morty living without consequences. He can do literally anything and just reset if he doesn't like the outcome. But then something different happens. Morty saves before approaching a girl who's going into a coffee shop. He talks to her, and she actually likes him. They start dating. And because this relationship is going well, because Morty is genuinely happy, he doesn't use the save point device. He just lives in the relationship naturally. The show then gives us a montage of Morty's relationship with this girl. They go on dates, they laugh together, they have fights and make up, they travel together. The relationship grows and deepens over time. We see them falling in love. The montage is set to music and has no dialogue, just showing us their relationship develop over what appears to be about a year. It's genuinely sweet and touching. Morty has found real love, real connection with someone who isn't his family or Rick. Then they go on a trip together, and their plane crashes. They end up stranded in frozen mountains with other survivors. The situation becomes desperate. People start dying. To survive, they have to resort to eating the bodies of people who died in the crash. It's horrifying and traumatic, but Morty and his girlfriend survive together. Morty is determined to save her life, so he makes a long, dangerous journey through ice and snow back to the plane's tail section to get supplies. He succeeds, and they're rescued together. They survived the worst thing imaginable and came through it together. Back home, the family throws Morty a welcome home party. He and his girlfriend are closer than ever after surviving something so terrible together. Everything seems like it's going to be okay. They went through the worst and they made it. But then Jerry, Morty's dad, picks up the save point device that Morty left sitting around. Jerry doesn't know what it is. He presses a button, curious about what the device does. Instantly, Morty is transported back to the moment he saved, before he met the girl. The entire relationship is gone. The year they spent together, falling in love, going through hell and surviving together, none of it happened in this timeline. The girl doesn't know who Morty is. When Morty tries to approach her now, she doesn't recognize him. All those memories, all those experiences, all that love, it only exists in Morty's mind. For her, they never met. Morty completely breaks down. He tries desperately to recreate the relationship. He approaches the girl the same way, says the same things, tries to make it happen again exactly how it happened before. But you can't recreate something like that. Real relationships don't follow a script. She doesn't respond the same way. She thinks Morty is weird and creepy for knowing things about her that he shouldn't know. She pepper sprays him. Morty reloads and tries again. She pepper sprays him again. He tries over and over, getting pepper sprayed repeatedly, crying in pain each time, unable to accept that the relationship is gone forever. This is when Rick reveals the truth about the device. It doesn't reset time. It doesn't go back to a previous moment in the same timeline. What it actually does is jump Morty to a different dimension, a parallel reality that's almost exactly the same, but where the events after the save point haven't happened yet. And when Morty jumps to a new dimension, the Morty who lived in that dimension dies. The device kills that dimension's Morty, so our Morty can take his place. Morty is horrified. He thought he was just resetting time, trying things over without consequences. But every single time he used the device, for pranks, for ice cream flavors, for stupid jokes, he killed another version of himself. He murdered countless Mortys across countless dimensions. All those fun, consequence-free moments came at the cost of other Mortys dying. And the girl he fell in love with, the relationship he had, that was with a version of her in a specific dimension. And when he left that dimension, he left her forever. He can never get back to that exact reality. Morty begs Rick to fix this, to undo it somehow. Rick says he can merge all the dimensions together, combining all the different realities Morty jumped through into one timeline. But merging dimensions causes what the show describes as intense torment for Morty. He experiences all the deaths of all the Mortys he killed. He feels the weight of everything he did crushing down on him all at once. It's described as psychological torture. After the merge, Morty faces the consequences. An angry mob shows up at the house. Police, people Morty wronged in various dimensions, even elderly people from the AARP, an organization for old people, who Morty must have done something to in one of his consequence-free pranks. All these people from the merged dimensions remember what Morty did and want justice. Morty is surrounded by everyone he hurt, everyone he killed, everyone he wronged when he thought there were no consequences. Rick offers Morty one way out: jump into the fake vat of acid that Morty made fun of at the beginning of the episode. The mob will think Morty died and leave. Morty has no choice. He has to use Rick's plan that he said was stupid. He climbs into the fake acid vat with fake bones floating around him, pretending to die in front of everyone. As he's climbing in, his girlfriend from the merged timeline sees him. She was watching. She runs away crying, thinking Morty just killed himself. Morty has to lie there in the fake acid, unable to call out to her, while Rick smugly points out that Rick's plan worked after all. Then Rick reveals one more thing. They're not even in their original dimension. Rick moved them to a different dimension just for this whole scenario because he didn't want to waste their home dimension proving a point to Morty. Everything that just happened, all the deaths, all the trauma, all the consequences, happened in a different dimension that Rick created just to teach Morty a lesson about respecting Rick's ideas. This episode is described as one more brick atop the Jenga tower of Morty's eroding psyche. That's a perfect description. Imagine a Jenga tower, a stack of wooden blocks that gets more unstable as you remove pieces. Each trauma Morty experiences removes another piece of his psychological stability. The sexual assault removed a piece. The dimension abandonment removed a piece. Every violent episode, every horrible thing he's seen, every time Rick manipulated or hurt him, each one removed another piece. This episode removes several pieces at once, and the tower is getting close to collapse. What makes this episode so psychologically damaging is that it targets something specific: Morty's capacity for love and hope. The relationship Morty had was real to him. He experienced a full year of loving someone and being loved back. He found genuine happiness. He proved to himself that he could have what he always wanted: a real connection with someone. Then it was taken away, and worse, he learned it was always temporary because it existed in a dimension he left behind. The fact that Morty can never get back to that specific dimension, that specific version of the girl, means the relationship is truly dead. It's not like a breakup where maybe you could get back together someday. It's gone permanently, erased by dimension hopping, and the only person who remembers it is Morty. He has to carry the memory of a year-long relationship that nobody else knows existed. This is a unique kind of grief, mourning something real that the world treats as if it never happened. The reveal about killing alternate Mortys adds another layer. Morty thought he was living consequence-free, but he was actually killing himself over and over in different dimensions. This forces Morty to face that his actions do have consequences, even when he doesn't see them. Every choice matters. Every action affects someone. You can't escape responsibility just because you can't see the results. This is the opposite of what Morty learned in Rick Potion number 9. That episode taught him nothing matters because you can just jump dimensions. This episode teaches him that everything matters and there's no escape from consequences. The torture of merging dimensions and feeling all the deaths is described as intense torment. Morty experiences the deaths of all his alternate selves at once. He feels what it's like to die, to be killed, to be erased from existence, multiplied across however many times he used the device. This is trauma on top of trauma, a concentrated dose of death and suffering that most people could never survive psychologically. And through all of this, Rick is smug and satisfied. Rick set this whole thing up to prove he was right about the acid vat being a good idea. Rick created elaborate psychological torture just to win an argument, just to make Morty admit that Rick is smarter. Rick destroyed Morty's relationship, forced Morty to kill alternate versions of himself, put Morty through torment, created a mob that wanted Morty dead, all to prove a point. The cruelty is staggering. The episode is described as showing a moment where Morty stands up for himself and has some degree of confidence and autonomy, but then he's immediately struck down. Morty tried to assert himself by challenging Rick and demanding respect for his ideas. For once, Morty wasn't just accepting Rick's superiority. He was pushing back, trying to have his own voice. And Rick punished him brutally for it, teaching Morty that challenging Rick leads to horrible consequences. This episode takes Morty's hope and crushes it. It takes his capacity to believe things can work out and destroys it. It takes his brief experience of genuine love and proves to him that nothing good lasts, that happiness is temporary, that connection can be erased. These are lessons that will poison Morty's future relationships and his ability to hope for anything good. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. After all this trauma, after years of being hurt and damaged in so many different ways, the show would finally do something it had never done before. It would have Morty actually name what was wrong with him, using the specific word that psychologists would use if they evaluated him. And that acknowledgement would come in the show's most recent season, confirming everything we can see has been building for years. Section 10. Explicit PTSD. Summer of All Fears. For 8 seasons of the show, we've watched Morty display every sign of severe psychological trauma. We've seen him shake with fear, stare blankly into space, explode in violent rage, and struggle to function in normal life. We've analyzed his symptoms and recognized the patterns of complex PTSD based on his behavior. But the show itself never directly stated what was wrong with Morty. It showed us the damage without naming it. That changed in Season 8, Episode 1, which aired in 2025. For the first time in the entire series, Morty speaks the actual words, "I have PTSD." The episode is called Summer of All Fears, and it starts with Morty and Summer already living as adults. Morty appears to be some kind of soldier or mercenary, and Summer is a businesswoman. They're working together to make phone chargers obsolete, trying to crash the entire charger industry. But then the show reveals this is all happening inside a computer simulation, a Matrix-like fake reality that Rick created as punishment. The reason for this punishment? Morty and Summer took Rick's phone charger without asking. Think about that for a second. Rick trapped his grandchildren in a fake reality as punishment for borrowing a phone charger. Not stealing it permanently, not breaking it, just taking it. And Rick's punishment was to put them in a simulation and leave them there. The show reveals that Rick planned for this to last a certain amount of time, but he fell asleep and accidentally left them in the simulation much longer than he meant to. While Rick was sleeping in the real world, Morty and Summer lived 17 years in the simulation. 17 years is more than Morty's entire life up to that point. He's 14 when the series starts, so 17 simulated years means Morty lived more than an entire second lifetime inside the Matrix. And it wasn't a pleasant life. The simulation was designed to teach them a lesson about taking things that don't belong to them. So everything in this fake world revolved around the importance of phone chargers. In this world, stealing a charger was treated like a serious crime. The episode shows us what happened to Morty during those 17 years. First, he was arrested for theft, probably for stealing a charger, since that's what the simulation was designed to punish. He was sent to a prison called Chargeria State Prison. In prison, Morty had to survive among violent criminals. He got into fights. He learned to defend himself. He got a tattoo of a charger, marking him as someone who had been in prison. The show tells us Morty was eventually released early for good behavior, but his time in prison changed him. After getting out of prison, Morty couldn't find a job because he had a criminal record. Nobody would hire him because of his past. He met someone named CJ at a bar, and this person convinced Morty to become a firefighter. Morty joined the fire department and worked putting out fires, saving people from burning buildings. This seems like a positive thing. Morty was doing something good, helping people. But then something happened that changed everything again. Morty and his fellow firefighters watched a broadcast on television. It showed a terrorist cutting a phone charger cable, which in this simulation world was treated as a horrifying act of violence against something sacred. Seeing this act of destruction against chargers filled Morty and the other firefighters with rage. They decided they needed to fight back against these terrorists. So Morty joined the military. In the military, Morty went to war. He fought in battles against enemies who were threatening the charger supply. And in these battles, Morty watched his fellow soldiers die around him. The show describes these deaths as happening in gruesome ways, meaning they were violent, bloody, and horrible to witness. Soldiers were blown up, shot, torn apart. Morty saw people he knew, people he probably considered friends, die terribly right in front of him. But here's something strange that happened in the simulation. Morty himself couldn't die. No matter how much danger he was in, no matter how many battles he fought, Morty survived when others didn't. This might sound like a good thing, but imagine what it would be like to watch everyone around you die while you keep living. You'd feel guilty for surviving when they didn't. You'd wonder why you got to live when they deserved to live just as much. This is called survivor's guilt. and it's a major source of trauma for people who live through wars or disasters.
When Rick finally wakes up and pulls Morty and Summer out of the simulation, they're adults in their minds even though their bodies are still young. They remember 17 years that didn't really happen but felt completely real to them.
Summer seems to adapt fairly quickly. She's confident and mature from the experience. But Morty is different. The show tells us that Morty is outright traumatized by what he went through. He's not just shaken up or upset. He's suffering from severe psychological damage. This is when Morty says the words himself. Someone asks him what's wrong or comments on his behavior, and Morty responds by saying, "I have PTSD." He names it directly. He recognizes that what he's experiencing is post-traumatic stress disorder. This is huge because it's the first time in 8 seasons that the show explicitly labels Morty's psychological condition. All the symptoms we've been seeing for years, all the trauma responses and emotional problems, Morty finally has a name for it. And we don't just hear about Morty's PTSD, we see it. The show depicts what's called a flashback, which is one of the main symptoms of PTSD. A flashback is when your brain suddenly makes you feel like you're back in the traumatic moment, even though you're actually safe in the present. It's not just remembering what happened, it's experiencing it again, like it's happening right now. Morty's flashback is triggered by a shattered beer bottle. The sound of glass breaking, or maybe the sight of the broken pieces, reminds his brain of something from the war. Immediately, Morty is no longer in the garage with Rick. In his mind, he's back in the war zone. The show actually shows us what Morty is seeing and experiencing in the flashback. We see explosions, we see soldiers dying, we see the chaos and violence of the battlefield. Morty's body is safe at home, but his brain is making him relive the worst moments of the war. This is exactly how PTSD flashbacks work in real life. Something in the present, a sound, a smell, a sight, reminds you of the trauma, and your brain responds as if the danger is happening again right now. Your heart races. You might start sweating or shaking. You feel the same fear you felt during the original trauma. For Morty, the shattered beer bottle threw him back into watching his fellow soldiers die, and he experiences all the terror and horror of those moments again. The show describes Morty's PTSD as driving, quote, him to destructive ends as a way to cope with pain. This means Morty's trauma is making him do dangerous, harmful things because he doesn't know how else to deal with the pain he's feeling. We see this when Morty steals Rick's death race car, a powerful armored vehicle with weapons. Morty drives this vehicle toward a nuclear power plant called Power Plant Valley. His plan is to destroy the plant, which would cause a massive power outage across North America. Without electricity, nobody would need phone chargers anymore, which in Morty's traumatized mind means the war he fought would have meaning. He'd be eliminating the need for the thing he fought to protect. This is trauma-driven logic. It doesn't make rational sense, but to Morty's damaged brain, it feels like the only way to make his suffering matter. He's trying to give meaning to his trauma by finishing what the war was supposedly about. He's also acting out his rage and pain in a destructive way because he can't process these feelings normally. His PTSD has him so messed up that destroying a nuclear plant seems like a reasonable action. Rick makes a revealing comment during all this chaos. He says that jaded, ex-con, war-induced PTSD Morty is a better hang than the normal PTSD version of his sidekick. Let's break down what this means. Rick is saying that Morty with severe, war-related PTSD from the simulation is actually easier to be around than Morty's, quote, normal PTSD. This tells us 2 critical things. First, Rick admits that Morty normally has PTSD. The normal PTSD version means Morty already had PTSD before the Matrix simulation. Rick has known all along that Morty has trauma-related psychological damage. He's known and hasn't done anything to help. Second, Rick actually prefers Morty with worse trauma because it makes him easier to control or more aligned with Rick's personality. The war trauma made Morty more like Rick. Jaded means tired and cynical, hardened by bad experiences. Rick likes this version better than the anxious, moral Morty who questions Rick's choices. Summer eventually talks Morty down from destroying the power plant. She appeals to him emotionally, reminding him that this isn't real, that the war wasn't real, that he doesn't need to do this. Morty stands down, but he's still deeply traumatized. At the end of the episode, both Morty and Summer decide to let Rick erase their memories of the 17 years in the simulation. They choose to forget the entire experience, to have it wiped from their minds completely. This decision to erase the memories is significant psychologically. On one hand, it seems like a mercy. Why carry around 17 years of traumatic memories from experiences that weren't even real? But on the other hand, choosing to erase memories instead of processing them is avoidance. It's running away from the trauma instead of dealing with it. And we know from earlier in the series that Rick has been erasing Morty's memories in Morty's Mind Blowers, removing traumatic experiences instead of helping Morty cope with them. Memory erasure might make Morty feel better in the short term, but it doesn't actually heal the trauma. It just hides it. And we see at the end of the episode that the erasure isn't perfect. Morty wakes up with a tattoo from his prison time, and he's confused about why he has it. The memories might be gone, but physical evidence remains, and probably psychological effects remain too, buried in his unconscious mind where he can't access them, but they still affect him. This episode is important because it confirms everything we've been observing throughout the series. Morty's strange behaviors, his emotional problems, his violent outbursts, his 1,000-yard stares, all of it points to PTSD, and now the show has stated it explicitly. Morty has been suffering from PTSD for years, probably since the sexual assault in Season 1 or the Dimension abandonment, and it's only gotten worse with each new trauma. The fact that Rick's comment refers to Morty's normal PTSD tells us that everyone around Morty knows he's damaged. They've watched him deteriorate psychologically and done nothing to help him. They've normalized his trauma symptoms as just how Morty is, instead of recognizing them as signs of serious psychological damage that needs treatment. This episode also shows the continuation of Rick's abusive pattern. He punished Morty and Summer with 17 years of simulated trauma over a phone charger, and he did it by accident. He fell asleep and forgot about them. Their suffering was just collateral damage of Rick's carelessness. And when they came back traumatized, Rick's response wasn't guilt or concern. It was noting that traumatized Morty is actually more enjoyable to be around than regular Morty. The episode ends with the memory erasure, with Morty and Summer going back to being regular teenagers who don't remember their 17 simulated years. But the trauma happened. Morty lived through prison, firefighting, and war. He experienced all of it, and even if he doesn't consciously remember it now, it affected him. It added to the pile of damage that's been building up since Season 1. The show describing this as one more brick atop the Jenga tower of Morty's eroding psyche back in the Vat of Acid episode is even more true now. The tower is getting more unstable with every new trauma. Eventually, if you keep removing pieces from a Jenga tower, or keep adding weight to an unstable structure, it collapses. Morty is approaching that collapse. He's been holding together through impossible amounts of trauma, but there's a limit to how much damage a person can take before they break completely. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But Morty's trauma doesn't exist in isolation. He's not just an individual suffering from PTSD. He's part of a family system where trauma flows from one generation to the next, where everyone's damage affects everyone else, and where the dysfunction is so deep that it's almost impossible to tell, where one person's problems end and another's begin. Section 11, the family system, generational trauma's role. Morty's psychological damage doesn't happen in a vacuum. He's not just an isolated kid who happened to experience trauma. He's part of a family where trauma has been passing down from one generation to the next like an inheritance nobody wanted. To fully understand what's happening to Morty, we need to look at the whole Smith family and see how everyone's problems feed into everyone else's problems, creating a cycle that keeps getting worse. Dr. Sheehan, the psychologist who analyzed the show, said something crucial about how trauma works in families. Trauma is often passed down from generation to generation. She explained that kids don't develop in a vacuum. They are often aware and often internalize family conflict, their parents' mental health issues. What she means is that children absorb the damage from their parents and grandparents. They pick up on the tension, the pain, the unhealthy patterns, even when nobody talks about them directly. And those absorbed problems become part of how the kids see the world and themselves. The Smith family is what Dr. Sheehan calls a family with, quote, conflict, mental illness, and instability. Everyone in this family is dealing with serious psychological problems, and those problems bounce off each other, making everything worse. Let's trace how the trauma flows through the generations, starting with Rick. Rick's trauma is the source of everything else. The show eventually reveals that Rick's original wife, Diane, and his daughter, Beth, were killed by another version of Rick from a different dimension. This Rick is called Rick Prime, and he approached our Rick offering to share portal technology. When our Rick refused because he wanted to stay with his family, Rick Prime murdered Diane and young Beth with a bomb right in front of Rick. This destroyed Rick's life and turned him into the nihilistic, emotionally damaged person he is now. Rick spent decades searching through infinite dimensions trying to find Rick Prime and get revenge. He never found him, so he eventually gave up
and moved in with a different version of his daughter Beth. Not his original Beth, but an alternate version who was still alive. This Beth never knew her Rick because he abandoned her as a child, which created her own set of psychological problems. So Rick is living with a replacement family, carrying massive trauma from losing his real family, and he's never dealt with any of it in a healthy way. Rick's refusal to process his trauma means he passes it on to everyone around him. His nihilism, his belief that nothing matters, comes from his trauma. His alcoholism comes from trying to numb his pain. His cruelty and emotional distance come from being terrified of caring about people because everyone he's loved has been taken from him. All of Rick's worst traits are trauma responses, and Morty is being raised by someone whose entire personality is built on unprocessed grief and rage. Beth, Morty's mother, has her own trauma from Rick abandoning her when she was young. She grew up without a father, wondering why he left, believing something must be wrong with her if her own dad didn't want to stay. This created what are called abandonment issues, a deep fear of being left behind and a desperate need to keep people from leaving, even when they're bad for you. When Rick came back into Beth's life as an adult, Beth was so grateful and desperate to have her father back that she let him do whatever he wanted. She let him take Morty on dangerous adventures, even though she could see it was hurting Morty. She let Rick disrespect her husband Jerry. She let Rick control the household. Why? Because Beth is terrified that if she sets boundaries or tells Rick no, he'll leave again. Her childhood abandonment trauma makes her unable to protect her own children from Rick's influence. Beth also hoped that Rick's adventures would make Morty stronger. She saw that Morty struggled in school, that he was anxious and had trouble fitting in, and she thought maybe going on adventures with Rick would help Morty gain confidence. This hope was based on good intentions, but it backfired catastrophically. Yes, Morty became more capable, but he also became traumatized, violent, and psychologically damaged. Beth's well-meaning choice to allow the adventures has contributed to destroying her son's mental health. Jerry, Morty's father, has his own issues. Jerry is insecure, unemployed for much of the series, and feels worthless. He knows Rick doesn't respect him. He knows Beth sometimes questions whether she should have married him. He knows he's not successful or impressive. This makes Jerry desperate for validation and respect, but his desperation often makes him act in ways that make people respect him even less. The marriage between Beth and Jerry is described in the show as codependent, which means they're both unhealthily attached to each other in ways that hurt them both. They stay together partly because they're afraid of being alone, not because the relationship is healthy or happy. Their marriage is full of fighting, resentment, and passive-aggressive behavior. And Morty and Summer grow up watching this dysfunctional relationship, learning terrible lessons about what marriage and love look like. There's an episode in Season 2 called Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, where Beth and Jerry go to an alien marriage counselor. At this counseling center, they put on helmets that create physical representations of how they see each other. Jerry's view of Beth becomes a huge, terrifying monster. Beth's view of Jerry becomes a weak, worm-like creature. These representations are supposed to be kept in cages for therapy, but they escape and cause chaos. The alien counselor is horrified and tells Beth and Jerry that their relationship is codependent, meaning they're unhealthily dependent on each other in ways that make both of them worse. The counselor says that the truth is, neither of them should have ever gotten together in the first place. But they did, and they had kids, and now Morty and Summer are growing up in a household where the parents' marriage is so dysfunctional that literal monsters representing their relationship can break free and destroy things. This is the environment Morty is developing in, not just Rick's abuse, but also parents who are too absorbed in their own problems to provide the stable, loving support Morty desperately needs. In Season 3, Beth and Jerry actually get divorced. This happens in the first episode of the season, and it has a huge impact on Morty and Summer. Dr. Sheehan pointed out that the effects of divorce are magnified in adolescence. Morty is at exactly the age where divorce hits hardest. He's old enough to understand what's happening, but not old enough to have the emotional tools to cope with it in healthy ways. We see how Morty handles the divorce in Season 3, Episode 2, called Rickmancing the Stone. Instead of talking about his feelings or getting support, Morty escapes to a post-apocalyptic planet and processes his emotions through violence. He enters gladiator fights where he kills people while imagining they're his father, screaming at them about Jerry's failures as a husband and father. Morty is using violence as therapy because his actual family isn't giving him real therapy or emotional support. The show makes it clear that both Morty and Summer are, quote, at pivotal points in adolescence, which makes them, quote, more impressionable and vulnerable to negative influences on their psychological development. They're at exactly the age when they need stability and support, but instead they're getting chaos and dysfunction. Their parents are, quote, preoccupied with their own hang-ups, so they don't have the emotional energy left over to help their kids deal with the trauma and stress. There's another episode, Pickle Rick, in season 3, where the whole family is supposed to go to therapy together. Dr. Wong, the family therapist, is smart and insightful. She immediately recognizes that Rick has serious problems. Interpersonal problems and negative views of authority, emotion, and those who he deems as less intelligent than himself. She also notes concern about Rick's alcohol use. Dr. Wong sees the family dysfunction clearly and tries to help, but Rick literally turns himself into a pickle to avoid going to therapy. He'd rather be a pickle, unable to talk or move normally, than sit in a room and talk about his feelings. This shows how terrified Rick is of actually dealing with his trauma and problems. And when Rick avoids therapy, the whole family misses the chance to get help. The one time they have a professional who could help them understand and fix their dysfunction, Rick sabotages it. At the end of the Pickle Rick episode, Dr. Wong talks directly to the family about what she sees. She tells them that Rick uses his intelligence to justify his sickness, that everyone in the family does this. They use being smart or being right as an excuse for being dysfunctional and hurting each other. She's absolutely correct, but the family doesn't really listen. They go back to their patterns because change is hard and scary, and Rick especially doesn't want to change. All of these family problems create an environment where Morty can't heal from trauma because trauma keeps happening and nobody is helping him process it. Imagine trying to recover from an injury, but you live in a house where people keep accidentally hitting your injury, and nobody notices you're hurt, and there's constant chaos that prevents you from resting. That's what Morty's family environment is like for his psychological injuries. The generational trauma pattern is clear. Rick's trauma from losing his family made him into someone who traumatizes others. Rick abandoned Beth, which traumatized her and made her desperate for his approval. Beth's desperation made her allow Rick to traumatize Morty. Beth and Jerry's dysfunctional marriage created an unstable home environment that made Morty more vulnerable to being damaged by Rick. Everyone's problems feed into everyone else's problems. Doctor. Sheehan said that Morty's parents and Rick possibly didn't provide him with a stable, warm household, and this could be resulting in anxiety and stress. But it's more than just could be. We can see directly that the family dysfunction is making Morty's trauma worse. When kids have a stable, loving home environment, they can recover from trauma better because they have support. When kids have an unstable, dysfunctional home environment like Morty's, trauma does more damage because there's no safe place to heal. The show describes the family overall as having conflict, mental illness, and instability. Conflict means constant fighting and tension. Mental illness means multiple family members have psychological problems. Instability means nothing is predictable or secure. The family might get divorced, Rick might leave, they might jump to a new dimension at any moment. This instability makes it impossible for Morty to feel safe, and feeling safe is necessary for healing from trauma. Summer is in a similar situation to Morty, dealing with the same dysfunctional family, but she seems to handle it slightly better. She's older, which gives her a bit more emotional development to cope. She's also not Rick's primary sidekick, so she's not experiencing the same level of direct abuse and trauma that Morty gets from their adventures. But Summer is still being damaged by the family dysfunction. She just shows it in different ways. The tragedy is that everyone in the family loves each other in their own broken ways. Beth loves Morty but can't protect him because she's too afraid of losing Rick. Jerry loves Morty but can't help him because Jerry can barely help himself. Rick loves Morty in his twisted way, but expresses it through control and abuse because that's all Rick knows how to do. Summer loves Morty, and they support each other, but they're both kids dealing with problems too big for them to handle alone. If this family could get real help, real therapy, real support, real change, maybe the cycle could break. Maybe Morty could heal. Maybe Rick could process his trauma instead of passing it on. Maybe Beth could work through her abandonment issues and set healthy boundaries. Maybe Jerry could develop self-worth that doesn't depend on others' approval. But none of this happens because the family is trapped in their patterns, and nobody is willing or able to do the hard work of changing. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. The family system Morty is trapped in doesn't just fail to help him, it actively makes his damage worse. And this brings us to the hardest question of all. Given everything we've learned about Morty's complex PTSD, his trauma bonding with Rick, his corruption into becoming like Rick, and his dysfunctional family system, what should actually be done to help him? And more importantly, is it even possible to help Morty at this point, or has the damage become permanent? Section 12. Clinical recommendations and prognosis. If a psychologist sat down to evaluate Morty Smith and saw everything we've discussed, the sexual assault, the dimension abandonment, the repeated traumas, the complex PTSD, the trauma bonding with
Rick, the repressed rage, the damaged self-image, the ongoing corruption of his personality, and the dysfunctional family system, what would they recommend?
And more importantly, what are the chances that Morty could actually get better? Let's start with what treatment would look like if Morty could get the help he needs. The first and most important recommendation any psychologist would make is this: Morty needs to be separated from Rick immediately. You cannot heal from abuse while you're still living with your abuser. You cannot recover from trauma while new trauma keeps happening. As long as Rick can take Morty on adventures, manipulate him, insult him, and put him in danger, Morty will continue to get worse no matter what other help he receives. This separation would be difficult because Rick controls the portal gun and the family's access to different dimensions. Rick could theoretically take the whole family to a new dimension if they tried to keep Morty away from him. But assuming separation was possible, Morty would need to stay away from Rick completely for a long time, probably years, to even begin healing. This isn't about occasional visits or supervised contact. Morty needs Rick completely out of his life to break the trauma bond and stop the ongoing damage. Second, Morty would need intensive therapy with someone who specializes in childhood trauma and complex PTSD. Not just regular counseling where you talk about your feelings once a week. Morty would need multiple therapy sessions per week with someone trained in specific methods that help people process trauma. There are particular therapy techniques designed for PTSD that help people work through traumatic memories in a way that makes them less overwhelming and painful. Morty would need this kind of specialized treatment, probably for years. Third, Morty would likely need medication, at least temporarily. His anxiety is severe enough that it interferes with his daily functioning. Medication could help calm his nervous system enough that he could participate in therapy and start learning healthier ways to cope. This wouldn't fix the underlying problems, but it could make him stable enough to do the real work of healing. Fourth, Morty would need family therapy, but only after Rick is completely removed from the picture. Beth and Jerry would need to work on their own issues and learn how to provide Morty with the stable, supportive environment he needs. They would need to understand how their dysfunction has contributed to Morty's damage and make real changes in how they parent and relate to each other. This would be hard work for them, and they'd need to be willing to change their own behavior patterns. Fifth, Morty would need support at school. His learning disability needs proper evaluation and accommodation. He needs help catching up academically after missing so much school for adventures. He needs a stable routine where he goes to school every day, has normal teenage experiences, and builds friendships with people his own age. School should be boring and predictable for a while, giving Morty's brain a chance to settle into normalcy. Sixth, Morty would benefit from group therapy with other trauma survivors his age. Talking to other teenagers who have been through terrible things and are working on healing could help Morty feel less alone and learn from how others cope. He needs to know he's not uniquely damaged, that other people have survived trauma and gotten better, that healing is possible. Seventh, Morty needs to learn emotional regulation skills, ways to handle intense feelings without violence or shutting down. He needs tools for managing anxiety, processing anger safely, and coping with memories of trauma. These are skills that can be taught and practiced, but they take time and consistent effort to learn. Finally, Morty needs to work on rebuilding his sense of self. He needs to figure out who he is separate from Rick, what he actually values, what kind of person he wants to be. This identity work is crucial because right now Morty's personality is being shaped by trauma and abuse. He needs to discover or rediscover who Morty is when he's not constantly terrified, traumatized, or trying to please Rick. That's what treatment would look like in an ideal world. But we need to talk about why none of this is likely to happen for Morty, and why his chances of getting better are unfortunately quite low. The biggest barrier is that Morty can't escape Rick. Rick has the only portal gun. Rick can travel to any dimension. Even if Morty's parents tried to keep him away from Rick, Rick could just take them all to a different dimension where the laws or social services are different. Or Rick could abandon them in a dangerous dimension if they defied him. The power imbalance is so extreme that Morty has no real way to get away from Rick unless Rick allows it. The second barrier is that Morty doesn't recognize the relationship as abusive. Because of the trauma bonding, Morty thinks Rick cares about him despite the cruelty. He makes excuses for Rick's behavior. He believes the adventures are making him stronger, not destroying him. When you don't recognize you're being abused, you don't seek help to escape the abuse. Morty would probably resist being separated from Rick, not understanding that the separation is necessary for his healing.
The third barrier is that Morty's family enables Rick's behavior. Beth won't stand up to Rick because of her abandonment issues. Jerry is too weak and intimidated to effectively protect Morty. Nobody in the family is willing to make the hard choice to cut Rick out completely, even though that's what Morty needs. They all benefit from Rick in various ways: his technology, his protection, the exciting life he provides, so they tolerate the damage he does. The fourth barrier is the memory tampering. Rick has erased Morty's memories of traumatic events multiple times. This means Morty doesn't even remember all the trauma he's experienced, which makes it impossible to process and heal from it. How can you work through a traumatic memory in therapy if the memory has been deleted? And even when Morty keeps his memories, Rick offers him the option to erase them, teaching Morty that avoidance is easier than dealing with pain. The fifth barrier is that the adventures provide something Morty wants. Yes, they're traumatic and dangerous, but they're also exciting and make Morty feel important. He gets to see incredible things, go to amazing places, and be part of something bigger than his boring life at school. This makes it hard for Morty to want to give up the adventures completely, even though they're destroying him psychologically. The sixth barrier is that Morty's identity is already being corrupted. He's already starting to become like Rick. He's already internalized the idea that his empathy and morality are weaknesses. The longer this goes on, the more his personality becomes like Rick's, and the less he'll want to change. Eventually, Morty might not want to heal, because being damaged and cold like Rick will feel normal and even desirable to him. So what's Morty's prognosis, his likely outcome if things continue as they are? Unfortunately, it's not good. If Morty stays with Rick, if the adventures continue, if the trauma keeps accumulating, Morty will continue on the path the show's creator has already laid out. He will become the next Rick. His empathy will erode away. His morality will disappear. His capacity for genuine connection will die. He'll become cold, cruel, nihilistic, and alone, just like Rick is. The show has told us this is where Morty is headed. Dan Harmon said Morty will one day be a new Rick. This isn't just a possibility, it's the planned trajectory. Every season, we can watch Morty get a little more like Rick, a little more comfortable with violence, a little more willing to manipulate people, a little less bothered by hurting others, a little more convinced that nothing matters. This is developmental corruption in action, and if nothing changes, it will be permanent. But there is a small window of hope. Morty is still 14. His brain is still developing. This means there's still some chance for change. Some possibility that the damage isn't completely permanent yet. If Morty could be removed from Rick's influence soon, if he could get intensive treatment, if his family could actually change, there's a chance he could heal. The younger you are, the more your brain can reorganize itself and form new, healthier patterns. The problem is that this window is closed. Every month Morty spends with Rick, every new trauma he experiences, every time he acts like Rick and gets rewarded for it, all of this is making the damage more permanent. Think of it like wet cement hardening. Right now, while Morty is still young, his personality is like wet cement that could still be reshaped. But the cement is drying, and once it hardens completely into adulthood, changing it becomes much, much harder. A psychologist evaluating Morty would probably say his prognosis is guarded, which means there's serious concern about whether he can get better. They would see a kid with severe trauma, ongoing abuse, no support system, and personality corruption already in progress. They would see someone who needs immediate intervention, but has no way to access it. They would see a tragic case of a young person being destroyed by the very person who should be protecting him. The most honest assessment would be this: if nothing changes, Morty will not get better, he will get worse. He will continue down the path toward becoming Rick, and that transformation will become irreversible. But if by some miracle, Morty could be removed from Rick's influence, placed in a safe environment and given proper treatment, there is still a chance, not a guarantee, but a chance, that he could heal and develop into someone healthy instead of someone damaged. The tragedy is that we know this miracle won't happen. The show is a comedy, and it will keep putting Morty in traumatic situations because that's what makes entertaining episodes. Rick will keep taking Morty on adventures because that's the premise of the show. And Morty will keep being damaged because that's the story Dan Harmon is telling. The story of how a good kid with a moral compass and a caring heart slowly transforms into a broken, nihilistic, emotionally dead person just like his grandfather. And this brings us back to where we started, to the fundamental truth about what we've been watching for 8 seasons. Morty Smith is a textbook case of complex PTSD, trauma bonding, and developmental corruption. And unless something drastically changes, his psychological destruction is not just ongoing, it's inevitable. Conclusion. So what would a psychologist say about Morty Smith? After examining everything we've covered, from the sexual assault that was never addressed, to burying his own corpse at 14, to the violent rampages fueled by repressed rage, to literally separating his conscience from himself because he thought empathy was toxic, to experiencing 17 years of war in a simulation, the diagnosis is clear and devastating. Morty has complex post-traumatic stress disorder resulting from repeated severe trauma during the most critical period of his psychological development. He's trapped in a trauma bond with his abuser that makes escape feel impossible. And most tragically, he's being systematically corrupted into becoming the next Rick Sanchez. This isn't speculation. We've traced the evidence through 8 seasons of canonical material. We watched Morty start as an anxious but good-natured kid who believed in right and wrong, who cared deeply about not hurting people, who wanted nothing more than a normal life with friends and maybe a girlfriend. We watched that kid experience trauma after trauma with zero support or healing. We watched him develop every symptom of complex PTSD, the emotional explosions and shutdowns, the deep sense of worthlessness, the relationship difficulties, the constant anxiety, and finally, the explicit PTSD diagnosis with visible flashbacks, end quote. Season 8. We examined how Rick's cycle of abuse and occasional kindness created a psychological trap where Morty can't leave even though staying is destroying him. We saw how Morty's rage, pushed down and denied, explodes in sudden violence that shames him but never gets addressed. We witnessed Morty literally tell us through the detox machine that he views his best qualities, his empathy, his morality, his ability to care, as toxic flaws that hold him back. We documented his transformation from hesitant, moral kid to someone who increasingly talks, thinks, and acts like Rick. The family system analysis showed us that Morty isn't just dealing with his own trauma, he's caught in generational trauma flowing from Rick's unprocessed grief through Beth's abandonment issues, manifesting in a household so dysfunctional that even alien therapists are horrified. And we established that while treatment is theoretically possible, every barrier to Morty's healing is locked in place, making his continued psychological destruction not just likely, but inevitable, according to the show's own creator. What makes Morty's story so psychologically devastating is the trajectory. This isn't a story about someone who experienced trauma and stayed damaged but fundamentally themselves. This is a story about trauma actively reshaping someone's personality during the exact years when personality is being formed. Morty at 14 is having his brain wired by fear, violence, betrayal, and Rick's nihilism. These aren't experiences he'll recover from. They're becoming who he is. The show has told us explicitly where this ends. Morty will become a new Rick. We're watching it happen in real time. Every season, Morty cares a little less, hurts people a little easier, sounds a little more like his grandfather. The wet cement of his adolescent brain is hardening into Rick's shape, and soon, it will be permanent. This matters because it's a brutal, honest depiction of what abuse actually does to developing minds. It doesn't just hurt you and leave scars you carry, it changes who you become. It corrupts your values, damages your capacity for connection, and transforms victims into perpetrators. Morty is being turned into the person who traumatized him, completing the cycle of generational damage. And perhaps the cruelest part is that Morty doesn't even fully understand what's being done to him. He thinks the adventures are making him stronger. He believes Rick cares about him despite the cruelty. He's grateful for the rare moments of approval while ignoring the ocean of abuse surrounding them. The trauma bond has him so thoroughly that he'll defend the relationship destroying him. A psychologist looking at Morty Smith would see a tragedy in progress. A good kid with real potential being systematically destroyed by someone who should protect him. In a family too damaged to intervene, with a prognosis that gets darker every day. They would see complex PTSD, trauma bonding, developmental corruption, and a window of hope that's rapidly closing. Most of all, they would see exactly what happens when a vulnerable, impressionable adolescent spends their formative years trapped with a brilliant, damaged abuser who's teaching them that caring is weakness and nothing matters. And they would understand that sometimes the most horrifying thing you can do to a person isn't to hurt them, it's to turn them into you. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.